Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. After the baseball scare, the remainder of her school year had passed without the slightest blip. Even Alice and Edward had stopped glaring at her at the lunch table, which both had grudgingly started eating at again and where she was now officially a permanent fixture. And both made the effort to be nice-ish. She thinks it might have had to do something with what had happened on the field that day. Although Jasper didn't go into much detail about what was said between Alice and him, there was definite tension between the two of them after that. While she wouldn't say she was entirely comfortable around them, and definitely nowhere near interested in a friendship, she still managed to drop her guard a little and be equally polite in return. Knowing that Jasper, Emmett, and Rose were usually always beside her when she was around them eased matters somewhat. She could tell from the tightness in Jasper's face whenever Alice spoke to her that he still didn't trust her, but so far there had been no more incidents. Bella had not only strengthened her relationship with her 3 vampires, bonding over movie nights, game nights, frequent sleepovers with Rose, and date nights with Jasper, but thanks to their years of experience and knowledge, Emmett, she'd been surprised to learn, was an absolute whiz at math. She had passed her 11th year with her highest marks ever, even earning a spot on the honors roll along with Jasper and Rose, which didn't really surprise her considering they had told her this was their 5th time going through high school. Emmett, who had proved he was intelligent, probably could have been on there as well, but he said he found homework tedious. Well, actually, the exact quote had been lame, and refused to do it, no matter how much Rose pestered him. She even surprised herself by agreeing to go to prom. It was the first school dance, or dance period, that she had ever gone to. Once she had almost been talked out of it by a persistent Alice, who had taken it upon herself to buy a dress without Bella's knowledge. Bella had taken one look at the dress, which she assured her was expensive, and any thought that Alice was starting to warm up to her, which she kinda doubted anyways, immediately disappeared. Not only was it the most hideous shade of fuchsia she had ever seen, a color that was pretty terrible to begin with, but the cut of it reminded her of something a spinster school marm would wear, and it looked at least 2 sizes too big. "You'll look fabulous," Alice had insisted. By the next day, it had mysteriously disappeared, and the twinkle in Emmett's eyes was more pronounced than usual. Rose had offered mock sympathies and told Alice she'd take Bella dress shopping herself, making no effort to be subtle when telling Alice that she was not invited. She'd had as much fun as a girl who didn't particularly like shopping could, spending the day with a perpetual blush on her face as Rose kept whistling and catcalling with every selection she had tried on, drawing irritated stares from the sour-looking saleswoman. She knew she had finally found the one when she slipped into a beautiful silk dress the color of emeralds, and Rose had fallen silent, a soft smile on her face. Even Nan had agreed it was the one whispering, "Beautiful," as she wiped a tear away. And Jasper, she'd remember the look of awe on his face for the rest of her life. Dancing in his arms that night, she didn't know why she had been so reluctant to go to a school dance before. But when Jasper brushed a soft kiss across her lips and Emmett and Rose grinned from their spot beside them, she'd known they wouldn't have been there with her. Even Charlie had noticed the changes in her, commenting on them often. When he realized who was responsible for it, he had given them permission to come over whenever they wanted. There was barely a day when he wouldn't come home to see one of them, or all of them, flaked out on the couch with Bella, or even up in her room. Unfortunately, the one day that it had been just Jasper up there with her had backfired a bit. When Charlie ended up coming home early, though they had both been fully clothed and on opposite sides of the room, the exact moment Charlie had opened her door, Bella had been digging through her dresser for a sweater for a walk the two had planned to go on, while Jasper was standing beside her bookcase, flipping through one of her books. It had still resulted in Charlie finding it necessary to give her the talk. Thankfully, he had given it a few days, conveniently and unknowingly, waiting for a sunny day when none of the others were around, before cornering her in the kitchen as she sat eating a bowl of cereal. The stern set of his shoulders had immediately made her wary, and she paused with the spoon halfway in her mouth, causing the milk to spill over the edges and dribble down her chin. She finished the motion, only sparing a few half-hearted chews before swallowing loudly. Setting the spoon back into the partially empty bowl with a clunk, she wiped at her chin and offered Charlie a tremulous smile. "Morning, Dad." For some reason, this felt like a dad moment to Bella. "Aren't you going to be late for work?" "Took the day off," he answered gruffly. "Uh-oh." She really hoped this wasn't about the broken and now kind of sort of hidden singing bass wall ornament that she had absolutely nothing to do with. Well, at least not entirely. If anything, it was Emmett's fault for throwing a book to her and assuming she'd catch it. Good riddance to bad rubbish, Nain had said when it happened. She hated the thing. For some eerie reason, it had always started singing whenever Nain walked by it. I didn't do it, she blurted, fully prepared to sell Emmett down the river. Sorry, Em, and I'd prefer for it to stay that way. Bella's brow furrowed. Huh? She pondered her father's words, and when the meaning clicked, she choked heavily on her spit. He's talking about me and Jasper having... She couldn't even finish the sentence, feeling the warmth of a familiar blush spreading over her cheeks. As much as she loved her vamp, and she really did, being the blushing virgin that she was, literally, she wasn't quite ready for that step yet. It also didn't help that the last time they had gotten close-ish, a misinformed noun, she hadn't talked to Emmett for 3 days for that little prank, had unexpectedly popped in. Nothing quite like having your great-grandmother seeing you and your guy half-dressed to cool your libido for a year or two. Although she could admit it had been a bit hysterical when she jumped off the bed with a screech and Jasper, who obviously couldn't see Nan, had sat there bewildered, lips still puckered. Especially when your grandmother is always around to keep an eye on you, she muttered under her breath. What was that? Charlie asked, with a frown. I said Nan gave me the talk before she died. Charlie cleared his throat reproachfully. Marie gave you the talk when you were 11. 10, actually. She shifted uncomfortably, flashing back to the moment she'd remember for the rest of her life. Now, Chime, this here represents the male penis. Nan's voice was all business as she wrapped her fingers around a ripened banana. I had to search all over the kitchen for something that would substitute for lady parts, she continued. Bella, speechless, had stared horrified at the sliced avocado. Originally I was going to use a bagel, but it looked more like a... Bella's cheeks burned as she desperately clamped down on the memory and pushed it back into the dusty corner of her mind where it belonged. She watched, mused, as Charlie fidgeted slightly. Yes, well, if you have any questions... I don't. He nodded, the relief in his face palpable. Okay, good. He patted her shoulder awkwardly. Glad we had this talk. He didn't seem to have the same reservations, with Jasper giving him the equivalent of the I own several guns and a shovel speech, letting his threat of, I am the chief of the police, remember that, son, hang between them for a few long, extremely uncomfortable moments. Nob, who, despite Bella's objections, had watched the whole thing and found it hysterical. Jasper, on the other hand, had admitted to being a little terrified. But apparently they had both said all the right things, and Charlie, comforted by the assurances that she was still a virgin, and the earnest love in Jasper's eyes when he said he had the utmost respect for her, had been convinced enough to allow them to be in her bedroom together, alone, as long as the door was kept open at all times. The improvement in her mood added to her stellar grades, and to the fact that he genuinely liked Jasper. Rose and Emmett had encouraged him to give her free rein over the summertime. Within reason, of course, and as long as she wasn't out all night and called and gave him a heads up. It turned out to be the best summer ever. Though they had repeated a lot of the same things they did during the school year, it was intercepted with the occasional road trip. They knew all the places that came alive at night, and a few impromptu suggestions of ding-dong ditch. Emmett's idea, of course. There had also been one particularly memorable night that had involved a Western bar. He don't even ask. Fake ID, several shots of Southern Comfort ordered solely for the name by a grinning Emmett, a completely demolished mechanical bull, which Emmett, against Rose's wishes, had insisted on trying, and the threat of a lawsuit. She might have been a little buzzed at that point, but she was certain she saw Jasper slip the furious owner a large wad of cash, but he remained mum when she sobered up enough to ask about it the next day. But the three of them hadn't hesitated to tell her the other things that had happened that night. After reacquainting herself with the toilet the next morning, early afternoon, at the Cullens' house, of course, she didn't dare go home in that state. She had wordlessly taken the toothbrush a grinning Rose had handed her, and began sloppily scrubbing her teeth, desperate to get the nasty taste out of her mouth. I'm never drenning again, she moaned around a mouthful of toothpaste. Pity, Rose smirked. You're quite the hilarious drunk. Bella groaned and leaned her forehead against the cool surface of the mirror, the toothbrush dangling from her mouth. What'd I do? Nothing, Rose replied innocently. By the way, did I tell you I love your shirt? Bella glanced confusedly down at the faded blue tank top that she wore. While she was thankful that Rose had taken the initiative to change her into the spare clothes she kept in her and Emmett's room for just-in-case purposes, she really didn't see anything special about it. Rose nodded. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a shirt so blue. The hell? Bella knew for a fact that Rose was lying through her teeth. The dress she had worn to prom was an absolutely beautiful shade of electric blue that had highlighted the golden strands of her hair and made her pale skin pop. And last night, Jasper's button-up shirt had been the most heart-droppingly amazing sapphire color. It had literally made his eyes glow, and he looked gorgeous in it. In fact, she vaguely remembered telling him that he had to wear the color blue for the rest of his life. Both of them were 100 times bluer than her shirt. Hell, Jasper's broken-in jeans were bluer than the shirt she wore. Bella spit out the toothpaste and rinsed off her toothbrush. What are you talking about? She asked cautiously as she placed it in the holder. Rose had bought specifically for her and reached for the small bottle of mouthwash. Another special purchase. Thanks to her 3 vampires, quite a bit of the Cullen house had been made Bella-friendly, much to Alice and Edward's consternation. Can't I compliment a friend? Bella narrowed her eyes with suspicion. Considering this friend just spent 5 minutes throwing up and currently looks like crap, she eyed the mirror pointedly, staring at the rat's nest on her head. Then no. So negative, Rose sniffed. I'm going to wait downstairs with the boys. I'll just let you get ready. She turned on her heel, wandering out the door and lowly humming a tune that Bella recognized but couldn't place. Amusement warring with frustration, Bella tipped back a capful of mouthwash and swished it around in her mouth. As the minty liquid swirled, she found herself humming the same chords that Rose had. Aha, she thought with satisfaction when the song finally clicked. As she began singing the lyrics in her head, a fuzzy memory from last night flashed, and Bella promptly spit the greenish liquid on the mirror. Oh God, I did. All thoughts of her appearance disappeared as she darted out of Rose's bathroom and bumbled her way down the stairs, almost falling when she managed to miss the last 2. There's my little Southern belle, Jasper called out cheekily when she stumbled into the living room. The smile slipped off his lips at the look on her face. Please tell me my massive hangover is playing with my mind and that I didn't really embarrass myself singing karaoke in front of a bunch of strangers, she begged. Jasper held his hand up to his chest in mock hurt. You mean I'm not your magic man? Never seen eyes so gold, Emmett crooned, lowly in Rosie's, who was sprawled on his lap, his voice cracking with amusement at the changed word. Bella groaned and dropped her head into her hands. I didn't? You did, Emmett countered cheerfully. I don't know what you were talking about in the woods that day, darling. You've got a pretty good singing voice. Certainly blew everyone else there out of the water. He turned to Emmett. Remember that redhead? Emmett cringed. You mean the one who sounded like a dying rabbit? Bella stamped her foot. I'm having a crisis here, she whined. Jasper set down the book he'd been flipping through and stood up. I promise you, everyone loved you there. You were a hit, he cooed comfortably, wrapping his arms around her and gently rubbing her back. She snuggled in his embrace. Maybe he was right, it really wasn't that bad, he continued in the same soft tone. Just try to understand. She jerked away, glaring at his cheeky grin and pushed roughly at his shoulders. I hate you, she grumbled, turning her nose up and walking out of the room as calmly and with as much dignity as she could muster. Hey, Jasper called to her as she was halfway up the steps. I thought you couldn't run away. Bella flipped him the finger and stomped the rest of the way up, fighting a grin as their infectious laughter trailed up after her. Despite the lingering embarrassment, the raging headache, and spending half the night praying to the porcelain gods, in the end it had all been worth it, thanks to the new nickname she'd acquired. In reference to the Southern Belle comment Jasper had called out that day, she had been Belle to him ever since, and it inspired all sorts of warm, gooey feelings in her whenever he used it. Almost more than Darlin did. She'd never tell Nan that it was her new favorite nickname. Speaking of Nan, as much fun as she was having, she'd feel the guilt settle in when, after days of hanging and crashing with her vamps, she'd finally come back to her place to see Nan smiling at her from the bed. None, she had stuttered the first time it happened. None of that, Shame, she'd ordered sternly. What did I tell you were the most important things in life? To live, to laugh, and to love. And you get to do all 3 every day, never regret that. This old girl can amuse herself, and at the end of the day, I'll still be here. Though she had to be reminded that on a weekly basis for the first month, she finally allowed herself to relax and heed her Nane's advice If she was honest, it would be the first time she had ever followed any of it. She had meant what she said to Jasper in the forest that day. They made her feel more alive than she ever had in her entire life. She enjoyed it so much that she was shocked when she finally looked up at her calendar and realized that not only was school staring in a week, but that her 18th birthday was coming up soon. She was getting the barest hints of a potential party at that point, and though she wasn't the biggest fan of parties, some of the best things in her life this year had happened because she was willing to step outside her comfort zone. So she decided to ignore the secretive whispers her vamps shared, and when Esme casually asked what her favorite cake was, she was actually surprised at Esme's involvement in it. Just like relations hadn't exactly improved with Alice and Edward, there was still a noticeable chill with the elder Cullens as well, more specifically, Carlisle. A chill that got downright arctic 2 days before her birthday. Ahem? Bella and Jasper looked up when Carlisle cleared his throat loudly to get their attention. Bella pouted. When Jasper realized that she wasn't cringing away in fear whenever he spoke of his past, he had become relaxed enough to share some of his tamer stories. Today's story involved towers and chicken feathers, and Carlisle had cut him off just as he was getting to a good part. Jasper raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Yes, Carlisle. I was wondering if I could talk to Bella for a minute. Bella's pout transformed into a frown. She was sitting right here. Would it really have been that difficult to ask her directly? Jasper must have sensed her anger, running a finger comfortably across her hand. Darlin', he asked, his eyes telling her she could refuse if she wanted to. She nodded hesitantly and flashed Carlisle a smile that she hoped didn't look like a grimace. Jasper leaned in to lightly kiss her cheek, his cool breath rusting her hair as he whispered, I'll be right outside the door, in her ear. Leaving the family library, which really could be called Jasper's library, seeing as how he was the only one that actually used it. She trailed behind Carlisle to his personal study, her nerves almost getting the best of her. She cursed that she hadn't insisted on Nang staying with her today. Though Nang had fallen back into the routine of following her to school and occasionally to the Cullens. Like Jasper, she still didn't trust Alice and Edward not to try anything. She'd make the effort to disappear during what she deemed ranger time, which was always accompanied by a wink. So, as soon as she was alone with him today, even if it was just in the library, a smirk had stretched her lips, and she promised to make herself scarce. Closing the door behind him after having a silent conversation with Jasper that Bella imagined was rife with threats, Carlisle gestured for her to sit in the seat in front of his desk while he settled in the one behind it. His hand folded as he focused an intense and what he probably thought was paternal stare on her. I realize you have become a part of this family, and I felt like it was time to have this conversation with you. Bella shifted uncomfortably. Would it be rude if she told him she didn't consider herself a part of his family, but Jasper's instead? I didn't have it with you earlier because I wished to see how this would develop. Jasper, Rose, and Emmett have never really attempted to dally with humans in the past like Alice, Edward, Esme, or even myself have, and I was concerned that it was something of a phase they were going through. Bella gritted her teeth, worried if she relaxed her jaw at all, it would gape open. A phase? He might as well just call me an experiment. He didn't seem to notice her anger. I knew it was serious when Jasper insisted on telling you, but even though he has made excellent progress atoning for his past, he has still led a very different life than the rest of us, and I thought that you thought I'd reject him, Bella finished lowly. There was no doubt he could hear the anger now. His eyes widened with surprise at the venom in her voice. Well, surely you can understand where I'm coming from. To learn not only that he was a vampire, but that I already know what he's done. He doesn't need you to repeat it. Carlisle coughed. Obviously, he wasn't used to being talked back to. Well, to learn that all on the same day, any other human would have run away, screaming. Okay, so to tell her that, not only was she a phase, but vaguely suggesting that she was abnormal as well, this guy was on a roll. I am happy you didn't, he attempted to recover. I truly do want the best for my children. His gaze grew stern again. But with no knowledge of how you may have reacted, he took a very real risk telling you. Yes, it paid off, but it was a risk nonetheless. Bella was becoming very uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. What are you trying to say? You have to understand what you're getting into. You can never tell anyone about this, not your mother, your father, or any friends you may have. The repercussions could be... The door banged open. Jasper refused to let Bella be subjected to another minute of this. That's enough, he barked. Son, I was just trying to make her understand. It didn't have to be done that way. You should have discussed this with me beforehand, he spat. He glared at Carlisle, sending him a mild dose of fear and feeling satisfaction roll through him when he cowered slightly in his seat. Turning to Bella, he held his hand out. Come on, darling, let's get you home. Silently leading her down the stairs, he grabbed the jacket that was wordlessly handed to him by a recently returned Rose. She must have heard the tail end of the conversation, because she shot him a smile that was equal parts sympathetic and angry and gave Bella a quick hug goodbye. Knowing that Charlie was home by now, and he'd be suspicious if he didn't hear a vehicle pull into the yard. Jasper drove her home, just like he had been doing every night for the past week. Charlie had finally taken Bella's truck in to get that very noticeable dent fixed. Jasper grinned slightly. At least that's what he told Bella. Pulling into her driveway, Jasper shut the engine off and turned towards Bella. Not needing any encouragement, she unbuckled her belt and slid across the seat. He knew he had vetoed the cup holder that divided the seats for a reason, other than the obvious, and into his open arms. Curling up against him, he could feel the tension drain out of her as his hands reached up to run through her hair. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Belle. It's okay, she mumbled. No, it's not. He didn't have to tell you that way. He couldn't hide the pain in his voice. Though he and Carlisle had never been that close, it still hurt to hear the thinly veiled insinuations he had about his past. She pulled back. Nothing he or anyone says will ever change my opinion of you, she swore fiercely. Leaning up, she brushed her lips against his. I love you, she murmured against them before pressing harder and deepening the kiss. As always, a burst of elation rushed through him at those words, and as desperate as he was to open his mouth to the soft tongue that was swiping at his lips, there was still more they had to discuss. Pushing her back gently, he closed his eyes and swallowed loudly at the soft, kitten-like mewl she released in protest. He waited until dazed, chocolate eyes met his. He was right, you know, about putting you at risk. I wanted so badly to tell you that I don't think we really stopped to consider the consequences. You. A warm finger pressing against his lips cut him off. I don't care. Belle, you can't possibly. I don't care. Looking into her eyes and feeling the resolve emanating from her, he knew she was serious. He didn't know if her reckless regard for it thrilled or scared him. There's something I need to know, though. Her tone and the look on her face were deadly serious. Anything, darling? A playful gleam entered her eyes. So how exactly does that story you were telling me end? He laughed. Bella rolled her eyes but gamely let Jasper tie a blindfold around her head. Is this really necessary? Where's your sense of adventure? Isn't that exactly what Emmett said before he made me take that? She realized Charlie was still in the room with her. Left turn in that video game when he knew a zombie was around the corner. She finished lamely. Video games. Right? Charlie's voice was stern, but amused. If he knew what she was going to say, he didn't call her out on it. Take good care of her, he directed at Jasper instead. You might have to hold her down, though. I've never seen someone who hated birthdays so much. Blame Bobo the dancing clown for that, Bella grumbled. Charlie let out a bark of laughter. Jesus, I forgot all about that. Jasper must have looked confused because Charlie began explaining. You see, for Bella's 5th birthday, Renee got it in her head to. No, Bella said firmly. We are not reliving that day ever again. He's mouthing that he'll tell him later, Chan. Do that, and I swear I'll come home someday, with a shaved head and 30 piercings in my face, she warned lowly. How'd she know? Charlie wondered out loud. I have eyes in the back of my head. You're facing him, darling. There too, she replied flippantly. Charlie chuckled. Have her back at a decent time, Jasper. Yes, sir. How many times do I have to tell you? It was fine at first, but the sir thing is starting to make me feel damn old. You're as old as you feel, Charlie? Bella snickered. Oh, the irony. Then I must be damn ancient, he grumbled as she heard his retreating footsteps. Have fun, Bella. Thanks for the laptop, she returned. Bella had been a little concerned at first that Charlie, on the misguided advice of one of his buddies at work, would have bought her a gift certificate or some other impersonal gift that she would never find a use for. She'd been pleasantly surprised when she'd opened the professionally wrapped with the clean lines and sharp corners were anything to go by gift, and was greeted with a brand new MacBook. For school, he had replied gruffly as she goggled at it, a little staggered by the very expensive price tag. And so you wouldn't have to put up any longer with that dinosaur computer I have. She felt Jasper place a hand on her lower back as he guided her out the front door of her house. He stopped her when she got down the porch stairs and leaned in close. "Your name, want a ride over?" he whispered. "Tell Ranger I'll meet you there," Nan called out. She said she'll meet us there. She heard Jasper open the door and squealed when he lifted her directly onto the seat. "Overkill, don't you think?" The truck dipped slightly when he climbed in on the other side. "No work whatsoever for the birthday girl," he replied cheerfully, slamming the door. "Tell that to my teachers." "You mean the English assignment?" She was so happy knowing that she shared 4 of the same classes with Jasper, 3 with Rose and Emmett, and none with Alice and Edward this year. They had deliberately chosen their courses that way. It was going to be a great year. "Darlin, it's on Wuthering Heights. You could do that in your sleep. Where's the sympathy for the birthday girl?" She pouted. Her lips quirked into a grin when Jasper snuck in a quick kiss before starting up his truck. "Excited? For what?" "Your party." She gasped loudly. "You just ruined the surprise." "Very funny." 10 minutes later, she felt the truck roll to a stop. Seconds afterwards, her door was opened and cool fingers wrapped around her own and gently pulled her out. "Making me walk, are you?" She should have known better than to tease, because the next second, Jasper swooped her up into his arms. She blushed lightly when she heard a second door being opened, and he carried her over the threshold like a groom does his bride. She giggled and buried her face in Jasper's shoulder when Rose started humming the wedding march. It was followed by a loud huff, which Bella knew without a doubt was Alice. "Not going to let it bother me," she decided as Jasper placed her on her feet. The blindfold was removed, and Bella's eyes widened as she took in the green and white streamers and matching balloons that decorated the living room. "Surprise!" The greeting was genuine and cheerful from Rose and Esme, but more subdued from Carlisle and downright sullen on Alice and Edward's parts. She noticed that a familiar booming voice was missing. She frowned. "Where's Em?" "We realized we forgot the ice cream," Rose answered slyly, walking up to Bella and wrapping her arms around her. "Happy birthday, Bella," she said with a small grin. Belle returned the hug, smiling widely when she spotted Nan in the corner. Nan pointed up at the streamers. "She was arguing about them not being pink right before you got here." No question who she was. Bella peeked over Rose's shoulder and noticed Alice and Esme were missing from the room. "Thank you for not making it pink," she whispered in Rosie's ear. Rose pulled back wide-eyed with surprise before comprehension dawned on her face. "As if I would make you suffer through pinkstrosity on your birthday." Another angry huff. Alice was back. Esme, who had placed an admittedly delicious-looking chocolate cake on the low table sans candles, Jasper had been amused when she insisted against them. She said it was her own quirky way of looking out for her vampires. Crossed the room to offer a soft, happy birthday. She looked like she was going to hug her as well, but probably got the sense that Bella wasn't 100% sure how receptive she'd be to it. She settled for awkwardly patting her shoulder instead. Carlisle was next, flicking an uneasy look in Jasper's direction first, and she nodded, leaning into Jasper in an attempt to quiet her rapidly growing anger as his presence brought to mind the conversation they'd had. Though Jasper had promised not to use her gift on her, stating that he wanted everything in their lives to be real and not merely manufactured, he must have sensed she'd be receptive to it, because almost immediately she felt calm spread through her. "Thank you," she sighed, which she let Carlisle believe was directed towards him. She felt Jasper tense when Edward wandered over from where he was lurking by the window and offered his own birthday greetings. Until that day, she was blissfully unaware that the words happy and birthday could sound that creepy together. Thankfully, she was saved from Edward's stalker stare by Emmett bouncing into the living room seconds later, singing happy birthday at the top of his lungs. He swept her up into his arms and twirled her around. "How does it feel to be practically over the hill now?" he asked, setting her back down on the ground. "Why don't you tell me? You're practically ancient." Emmett licked his finger and slicked it suavely over his eyebrow. "You're just jealous. I look damn good for my age." Couldn't argue with that, could she? "Present time," he decided suddenly, throwing a grin at Rose, who walked over to the shelf over the fireplace and returned with a card and a small green box. Bella grinned when she glanced down at the homemade card. On it were 4 crayon stick figures under the bright red happy birthday letters. 3 of them had over-exaggerated vampire fangs and golden eyes. It wasn't hard to guess which one was Rose, even without the long scribbles of blonde hair. The 2 overly large circles drawn over the chest area gave it away, and blew away any confusion over who drew it, and the one in the middle was her. Flipping it open, the grin turned into a laugh when she read the message inside. "Hope it doesn't suck." The word suck was twice as big as the rest of the sentence, and underlined twice, as if she really needed the extra emphasis to get what Emmett was saying. Passing the card to Jasper for safekeeping, she eyed the small box, hoping that it wasn't too extravagant. She was no fool. She was well aware that these people had more money than most could ever dream of having. Bella opened it and frowned. Pulling out the small objects, she dangled them from her fingers and looked at Rose perplexed as the light caught the small silver Swan keyring. Aren't these the keys to my truck?" The same truck that just last week Charlie claimed he was finally getting fixed. She was suspicious now. Rose grinned. She knew exactly what Bella was thinking. "I might have gotten him to tell a little white lie." Emmett laughed. "Charlie would have just as easily told you it was stolen if Rosie asked him to." It was true. Bella had seen tough, stoic Charlie turn into a stuttering, blushing, gooey mess whenever Rose was in the near vicinity. Although eyeing the light blue dress Rose was wearing and how nicely it framed the girls, who could blame him? "What did you do to Bob?" Otherwise known as Bucket of Bolts. Hey, Nan wasn't the only one capable of clever nicknames. Rose took her hand and led Bella over to the large picture window. "I restored that truck to its former glory." Bella's eyes widened. That couldn't possibly be her truck. It looked like it just rolled off the assembly line. The rusted red paint had been replaced with a gleaming green, similar to the color her prom dress had been. A ray of sun broke through the copse of trees surrounding the driveway and lit up her truck, causing the coat of paint to literally sparkle like thousands of diamonds had been mixed into it. It was almost the same effect that her vampire's skin had. "It's not just the outside I shined up either," Rose explained. "I replaced all the parts on the inside too, and now you won't have to worry about it rattling apart or stalling if you try to take it above 50. There was a gleam in Rose's eyes as she gleefully rattled off all the parts that she had replaced, seemingly forgetting that Bella probably only knew what two of them even were. "And with a new V8 engine I installed, you'll be able to top a 120 easy." "You do realize that my dad is the chief of police?" Bella commented dryly. Rose nodded, a wicked grin on her face. "Exactly. Means you'll be able to get away with it a lot easier." Heavy hands come to rest on her shoulder, the reflection in the glass telling her it was Emmett. "I also took the liberty of installing a new sound system, plus I had a little something extra made for you. You'll find out when you take it home." Bella blinked back the tears. "This is too much," she insisted. Rose stepped up on her other side, caging Bella in her and Emmett's embrace. "No, it's just enough." The moment was broken when Carlisle cleared his throat loudly behind her. "He's really making a habit of that," Bella thought irritably as she turned. "Esme and I got you a little something as well." He handed her a flat white envelope. Bella looked at it hesitantly. It looked like it was just a card, but something told her that's not all it was. She shifted her eyes up to Jasper, who appeared to be fighting a frown. Looked like he didn't know anything about it either. "Thank you," she replied, slowly sliding her fingers under the seams of the flap. "Think he licked it?" Nana quipped in the background. Bella had to hold back a slightly hysterical bark of laughter. Jasper had told her it took copious amounts of venom to begin the change, but not wanting to risk the chance, even for such a minuscule L, Bella removed her fingers and began methodically peeling back the paper instead. She pulled the card out, a little overwhelmed by the glittery foil on the front. Was it possible for a card to look expensive? She took the time to note that she had appreciated Emmett's poorly attempted card. Big boobs and all. More than this Hallmark monstrosity. $10, said Alice, picked it out. She opened the card but was unable to read the generic and undoubtedly cheesy message inside. All she could see was the check that was as crisp and pristine as the day it was torn from the checkbook. The Cullen crest was at one corner, and if it wasn't bad enough that it was made out to Isabella Swan, then the amount certainly was. A $10,000 birthday present, she thought incredulously. This is seriously a little something to him. She shook her head. I can't accept this. When what she really wanted to say is, I won't, to get this days after Carlisle had made it clear how important the family secret was, made it feel like hush money. Just looking at it made her feel dirty. Nonsense. I give all the members of my family similar checks on their birthdays. Esme nodded encouragingly behind him. This was the second time he mentioned being part of his family. But she didn't feel that way at all, not with his family at least. This was another thing she desperately wanted to say, but stuck with shaking her head instead and repeating herself with a strained smile. She gingerly removed the check from the card. She would keep that at least to show that she appreciated the effort, even if part of her didn't, and held it out as a reluctant Carlisle took a step forwards. He was intercepted by an angry Alice darting in front of him. "You are so ungrateful," she sneered. She roughly snatched the check out of her hand, causing it to glide cruelly across her palm. Bella gasped at the slight pain, and at the satisfaction that flashed briefly through Alice's eyes, and at that moment she realized why Alice had been so sickly sweet to her since the baseball field. She had been biding her time. His eyes fell to her stinging palm just in time to watch a minuscule drop of blood well up from the shallow 2-inch paper cut. It wasn't a lot, not even enough to really necessitate a band-aid if she didn't feel like it. But when you're in a room full of vampires, not enough becomes just enough, especially for one that's been gunning for a taste of you since day one. Chime, Bella's eyes closed in pained defeat. "Too late, Nan." "I know. Van," she yelped stupidly. Seconds before a hungry growl rumbled through the air. Things happened rapidly after that. A snarling Jasper darted protectively in front of her, and Carlisle, ever the mediator, stepped in front of Edward, his hands up in a placating gesture. "Now calm down, son. Mine!" Edward's roar shook the house. "Emmett!" Jasper barked, and seconds later, Bella felt the wind whipping through her hair as she sat safely encased in Emmett's powerful arms. The last sound she heard was the loud crack of two bodies colliding. Bella blankly watched Emmett pace the bedroom. Thank God Charlie wasn't here. His heavy footsteps were in serious danger of cracking her floor. Every few minutes he'd pause and turn to her like he had something to say, before clacking his mouth shut and resuming his pacing. It had now been 15 minutes since they left the house. 15 agonizing minutes where she worried about Jasper and he worried about Rose. She jerked when Nan suddenly appeared in the room. "Nan?" Ignoring Emmett's startled look, she jumped from her bed and stumbled towards her. "Where were you?" she demanded. "You weren't here and I was so worried, and why weren't you here?" "I stayed behind to watch out for Ranger and Star," she explained, running a hand soothingly through Bella's hair. Despite the situation, Bella felt the urge to chuckle when she saw Emmett's mystified gaze fixed firmly on her moving hair. Still not used to the fact that none could touch her, even after all these months. They're fine. They should be here in a few minutes." Bella's shoulders slumped. She said, "They're fine," she informed a frantic Emmett. "And they're coming as we speak." "What happened?" Emmett asked the empty air. "It was a lot less brutal than the last fight. Ranger had that boy subdued within seconds," Nan smirked, and ended up ripping off his arm in the process. Star attacked the girl and ended up tearing out a fistful of her hair. The screams, God Lord, if I wasn't already dead, it would have burst my eardrums. Bella relayed this to Emmett, who chuckled. "That's my Rosie. They were being taken out to hunt right before I left." Bella rushed over to the window when she heard the approaching engine and the gravel crunch in her driveway. Jasper and Rose had driven her truck home. She saw the doors swing open and slam shut before two figures darted from her driveway and were bursting through her bedroom door. Seconds later, she hadn't even heard their feet hit the stairs. One threw themselves into Emmett's open arms, and Bella mimicked the action with the other figure. "Jasper," she murmured into his neck. "I don't know how many more moments my frail human sensibilities can take." He chuckled lightly. "You won't have to go through that again." She pulled back. "But Nan said you just hurt him." There was a dark look on his face. "I didn't kill him," he agreed, sounding strangely angry about it. "But I did make him well aware of what would happen to him if he so much as blinked in your direction again." Scanning her eyes over his face, she could see the fierce protectiveness burning in his eyes, but also the sadness he was trying to hide. "What did they say to you?" His eyes widened with shock before he averted them. "It was nothing, darling." Rose tore herself away from Emmett. "Please don't tell me you actually believed what that bitch said." "What who said?" Bella demanded. Jasper's eyes were still downcast, and it was Rose who answered. "Alice," she called him a monster. Bella gasped angrily. "No." She cupped her hands around Jasper's cheeks and forced him to meet her eyes. "No," she repeated firmly. "You better listen to Rose, Jasper Whitlock, or I'll be forced to smack you." Jasper's lips quirked slightly. "It'll probably break your hand, which is all the more reason to listen to what I say. She's the monster, Jats. Edward's the monster. But you You're the hero." Emmett coughed. "We'll just give you two a moment. Come on, Nan," he called out gamely as he guided Rose out the door. "Let's leave these two lovebirds alone." Nan chuckled and disappeared. Jasper settled down onto her bed, pulling Bella down on his lap and burying his face in her neck. He breathed in her comforting scent, letting the lingering tension drain from him as she raised her hand and began running her fingers through his hair. "I wanted to kill him, he admitted softly. Her fingers paused in his hair before resuming their soothing motions, silently encouraging him to continue. All he remembers is the venom roaring in his ears, the red that overtook his vision. It had taken Rose speaking one single word, his name, before he finally came back to himself. Edward's left arm, still clad in the dark gray sleeve of his sweater, was clutched tightly in his hand, and bald-faced horror and the faintest flickering of disgust was on 4 of the other 5 faces in the room. Esme was coddling a hysterical Alice, who was sporting a brand-new bald spot on her head, courtesy of Rose if the smirk on her face and the clump of black hair at her feet was anything to go by. Carlisle had once again stepped between him and Edward, who, now that the mindless hunger had vanished and his eyes had turned back to a pained gold, was cowering behind him in fear. "Give me his arm, Jasper," he ordered. His posture was as authoritative as his tone, but there was fear tainting his emotions. "What happened to Son?" Jasper thought bitterly. "He was warned, Carlisle," he spat as he threw the arm to the ground at Carlisle's feet. He supposed it was his own fault for not making his words to Edward as severe as he had Alice's. A simple keep your distance had seemed to do the job, and up until that day, other than occasionally staring at her long enough to get a warning glare from Jasper, Edward had normally went out of his way to avoid Bella. That added to the fact that he had never really considered Edward to be much of a threat. Despite the advantages his gift gave him, he was a rather piss-poor fighter, foolishly lulled him into a false sense of security. And because of that, he was just as much to blame for the danger he had put his mate in. He would never make that mistake again. Carlisle bent to retrieve Edward's arm. "It didn't need to." Jasper scowled. It was the baseball field all over again. "This diplomatic bullshit act is really getting tired, Carlisle. You know exactly what he would have done. She's his singer, for Chris' sakes." Edward has always had excellent control. Jasper let out a harsh bark of laughter. "Is that what happened? Was that Edward in control? You could have used your gift to stop him. You didn't have to rip his arm off." "My mate was being attacked," Jasper seethed, before deciding to go for the jugular to get his point across. "And if you're this flippant about a vampire's mate, then I truly feel sorry for Esme." Carlisle stiffened. "We're going to take Edward out to hunt, and then we're going to run up north for a few days. Perhaps that will give us all time to cool down and think over things." "I don't need to think over anything," Jasper replied coolly. "If he even looks at her wrong again, I won't be as nice." "Nice?" Alice shrieked. "You call this nice? What the hell is this girl doing to you? You've never attacked one of us before." "Never. She's turned you into a monster." "Unless you want to be bald, bitch, I suggest you shut your mouth," Rose snapped. Jasper squared his shoulders, determined to not let Alice see how much that one word had hurt him. "Turn me into one?" he replied darkly. "You forget my history, Alice." "Jasper, no," Rose murmured, squeezing his arm in support. "Forget?" Alice laughed cruelly. "As if I could forget." She was cut off by a hand clamping over her mouth, as Esme exerted a small amount of control over the situation for possibly the first time ever. "No more," she warned Alice, holding her tightly to her body when she began struggling in her embrace. There was still horror mixed with a hint of resignation in her emotions when she nodded sharply at Jasper, and despite the vaguely united front she had shown him, he knew it was time to leave. "Let's go, Carlisle," she said, grabbing Edward's remaining arm and firmly guiding him and Alice out the sliding glass doors behind them. "We'll be back in 2 days." Carlisle didn't even bother to turn around to deliver his departing news. Jasper and Rose stood silently as they watched him dart out of sight. With him, Jasper could feel the final bonds that tied him to the rest of the Cullens snapping completely. He raised his hand to his chest, feeling a brief moment of melancholy at the sudden absence of a bond, no matter how weak that had been with him for over half a century. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Rose mimic the motion. "Just like that," she murmured. "Just like that," Jasper echoed. He dropped his hand. "Let's get back to our mates. They're probably working themselves into a panic by now." There was a faint shadow of a smile on his lips. "Not just mates," Rose replied earnestly. "Family." "Yes," Jasper agreed, The only family I'll ever truly need. He exhaled shakily as he finished his recap. And I probably would have if Rose hadn't stopped me. Well, I'm your mate. That sort of thing is instinctual, right? His bell really was amazing. She had taken the mating news as casually as she had the vampire news. Mate? He tensed as he watched her roll the word around in her head. What does that mean exactly? I could go into the unnecessarily complicated vampire explanation, but basically it means that you are mine and I am yours. Soulmates? She asked. He nodded. She grinned. I could have told you that. It is, he agreed. If Rose had been the one attacked, or vice versa, Emmett would have done the same thing. Because of Carlisle's actions tonight, he was seriously beginning to question if it applied to him and Esme as well. He wouldn't be surprised if it proved to be untrue. Their bond had never been as strong as the one Rose and Emmett shared. He often wondered if Esme's affection for Carlisle was heavily influenced by the Maker bond. It was the same reason he had mistaken the emotions he had felt for his own bitch, Maker, during the wars. But he didn't really want to rehash that part of his life. Not now, and hopefully not ever. This night had already been bad enough. Bella seemed to be in the same frame of mind. Then there will be no more of this monster talk, ever, again. She punctuated each of her final words with a sweet kiss to his lips. Agreed, he purred, allowing the teasing warmth of her lips to soothe the ache that Alice's words had left for a few long moments. Pulling back slightly, he shifted them so he could lean against the headboard of her bed and pulled a small, thin box from the pocket of his rumpled shirt. Didn't get a chance to give this to you at the house. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Bella turned the silver box over in her hand, noting that it was dented slightly. Thankfully, that was all the damage it sustained in the fight. Open it, he prodded. She pulled off the crumpled and obviously retied ribbon and gasped lightly at the object in it. It was a silver bracelet with several different charms dangling from it. She removed it and spread it out on her palm, fingering each individual charm: a bell, a cowboy hat, a star, a dog, and a sun, and silently naming each person they represented. I had it specially made. I know other than your necklace, you usually don't like wearing jewelry, but I thought, do you like it? He asked warily. I love it, she replied softly, blinking away the tears forming in her eyes and holding it out to him. Will you put it on me? He reached over and fastened it on her wrist, placing a kiss on the exposed skin above it. Even though they were essentially alone, she had distantly heard the front door shut, and it was her birthday. Bella felt that after the mess today, this was a time for comfort, not for passion. So despite the tingling sensation that shot up her arm when he brushed his cool lips against her skin, she steadfastly ignored the urges that came with it and flopped down on the bed, pulling him down to lay beside her. She had no doubt he could feel her desires, though, and felt guilt sweep through her. Soon, she promised, tracing the features of his face. He kissed her fingers when they reached his lips. I'd wait for you forever, he promised. Forever. She liked the sound of that. Jasper released her hand the moment they broke through the bushes surrounding their little hidden clearing. He hesitated for a brief second before turning to face her. From the look he gave her, Bella knew he didn't bring her here to share good news. The Cullens got back today, and after what happened on your birthday, the others and I have talked it over and decided it would be for the best if we left town. His voice was monotone throughout the entire thing. Her heart stopped. What? She was certain she misheard him. We're a danger to you, Bella, he paused, and you're a danger to us. But you wouldn't hurt me. You can't. He shook his head. I don't know that for certain anymore. I was tempted by your blood that day. I wanted it. Bella, more than I've ever wanted anything in my entire life. I haven't had a slip in years, and I can't live with the constant worry of whether or not you'll bleed in the future. He sneered, his next words cutting her like a knife. And we both know it'll happen. You're so damn clumsy. Then change me. You won't have to worry anymore, and we can be together, she begged. Jasper sighed in exasperation. You're not listening. I wanted your blood more than anything. Hard gold eyes burned through her. Even you. Her bottom lip wobbled. What are you saying? I think it's your blood I've desired this whole time. It's never been you. You can't mean that. I do, he stated firmly. Emmett and Rose expressed the same concerns. We'll be leaving in a few hours. Don't bother coming over to say goodbye. He turned to leave. Just forget us, Bella, because we'll be doing the same. She lurched forward and desperately grabbed his arm. But I love you, she choked out. He shook her off. Forget that too. Jasper, please don't leave me, she screamed as he disappeared into the brush. She sank to the ground, pulling at the strands of her hair. Jasper, she wailed. Jasper! Jasper. Jasper! Belle, wake up, darlin'. Bella jerked up in bed, wildly looking around the room. It took a second for her brain to process her surroundings before she finally realized she was in Jasper's bedroom. More specifically, in his bed. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she turned and pressed her face into the cool, naked chest of the man beside her. She shuddered as his arms wrapped around her, pulling her similarly naked body against him. He was still here. It was just a dream. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" he asked, running a hand soothingly through her hair. "Bad dreams," she mumbled as the tears tapered off. "About." She shook her head, unintentionally smearing the wetness from her tears across the broad expanse of his chest. "It's not important." The room was silent for a few long moments. "You sure?" "Mm-hmm." "Then try to get some more sleep, darling." She felt him shift his head towards the heavy curtains where the weak sunlight was just starting to peek through. "It's still early." "All right," she agreed easily, feeling a little drained from the dream. He twisted over on his back and maneuvered Bella until her head was resting over his unbeating heart. "Jasper," she whispered, tracing a nonsensical pattern on his chest. He purred, the rumble jostling her head pleasantly. She craned her neck up and met his eyes, which were glowing in the dim light. "You won't ever leave me, will you?" "Never," he swore ardently. "Good," she sighed, placing her head back on his chest. As his arms curled around her, Bella closed her eyes, and to assuage her fears, as she drifted off, she replayed how the conversation had really went. "I've never been on a picnic before." They were in a different part of the area that had long ago been claimed as their own, nearer to the cliff's edge and overlooking the wooded valley below. Over her shoulder, she could see the shoddy cabin that Emmett had fixed up in the distance. When Jasper had shown up at her door with a basket in one hand and a blanket in the other, she had felt a rare sort of giddy excitement. Jasper quirked an eyebrow and leaned back on his hands on the thick blue blanket beneath them. "Really? Never? No teenage boy has attempted to sweep you off your feet with a romantic gesture such as this." Bella snorted. "Clearly you're giving way too much credit to teenagers of the male persuasion. I'm pretty sure romantic gestures nowadays consist of liking a girl's status on Facebook." "You, sir," she toasted her glass of raspberry lemonade in his direction, "are a rare breed." The smile didn't quite reach his eyes. She drained the rest of the fizzy drink and placed the glass beside the old-fashioned wicker basket that Jasper, more likely Rose, had managed to scrounge up. "What is it?" she asked, reaching for a strawberry and hoping that the movement would distract from the tremble in her hand. He looked out pensively over the valley of trees below them, the late afternoon sunlight causing his handsome features to sparkle subtlety. "The Cullens got back today." That would explain being woken up by his cell phone ringing at 3 in the morning after an impromptu decision to crash at her house for the night. Charlie, of course, being completely unaware. She only vaguely remembered the hushed conversation that had followed, thanks to her drowsy state. But she did recall Jasper brushing a kiss across her forehead and whispering that he would see her later. After almost half a day of waiting, thankfully having the day off thanks to a teacher's meeting, later had turned out to be this picnic he had surprised her with. "And," she prodded, lifting the sweet red fruit to her lips, "we talked. It didn't go well." "How well is not well?" she asked, biting off a piece and chewing slowly. She wondered if Edward had lost another limb. "Is everyone okay?" And by everyone she meant him. Rose and Emmett. "We're fine. Things were thrown and a window was broken. She would later find out that the thing thrown was Edward through the window, but we all escaped with our parts intact. Maybe it was just her, but he sounded almost disappointed about that." She swallowed and popped the rest of the strawberry in her mouth. "They've decided to leave for good." She choked on the half-chewed morsel. "You're leaving?" she gasped, wiping her juice-stained fingers on her faded jeans and staring down hatefully at the food spread out before her. The sweetness of the moment was ruined with the realization that he had probably only planned all this to soften the blow. Didn't work, she thought bitterly, wiping angrily at the tears trailing down her cheeks. "What? No!" Jasper barked, his reply echoing through the glen below them. Bella loudly exhaled the breath she had even realized she was holding and collapsed backwards on the blanket, blatant relief calming her racing heart. "Thank God," she muttered. "Don't ever do that to me again." The weak sunlight overhead was blocked out when Jasper leaned over her. His eyes pained. "How could you even think we'd do that?" "I'm sorry," she whispered meekly. "It's just, you've been with them for so long, I thought." The fabric underneath her bunched when she shrugged her shoulders. He sighed and shifted away. leaning his weight against one hand. "This is probably our fault for not doing more to assure you." He met her eyes steadily. "We can't leave you, Bella. We won't." "The mating bond," she said flatly before turning her head away. "I don't want you to feel like you're forced to stay here." She heard Jasper let out a surprised cough before she felt him shift to stretch out beside her. A pale hand grasped her cheek and gently forced her gaze back to him. "Please tell me you don't think that's what keeps me here? What keeps us here?" She lowered her eyes. "I can't deny that the bond is a part of why I'm choosing to stay. Only one of the many reasons," he clarified when she struggled to turn away. "But if I really didn't want any part of it, and that's all it was, then I could simply ignore it. I'm not saying it'd be easy. In fact, it hurt like hell. But I'm one of the few vampires that could do it, considering I spent 60 years repressing a large part of myself." "So, you're saying you'd leave if you could?" Jasper growled. "Seriously, you have the worst case of selective hearing ever. I'm staying because I love you. Rose and Emmett are staying because they love you. We stayed with the Cullens because we felt like we had to. And for the first time ever, we're finally going to stay because we want to." He paused thoughtfully. "And to be honest, more than anything, it feels like a weight has been lifted." "What about the house?" she asked curiously. He grimaced. That led to another lengthy argument, so the three of us settled it the easy way. "Violence?" Jasper chuckled. "No, we bought it." Bella gaped at him. "You're serious?" It was a bit daunting to know that a bunch of teenagers could just up and buy a house if they felt like it. She had to remind herself that these weren't simply just a group of teenagers and that this purchase was probably little more than a drop in a well to them. "Yes," he replied simply, as if it was the most obvious solution in the world. "And now you're stuck with us. Think you can handle that?" A serious look accompanied the question before melting into a teasing grin. "I think I can manage," Bella sighed, cuddling up to his side. He stretched an arm underneath her and curled her closer until her face was buried in his neck. "I'm sorry," she murmured into his skin. "I guess I couldn't help but think about everything you're giving up for me." He shifted his head to look at her, their faces only inches apart. "Funny, I'm thinking of everything I've gained." He trailed his hand up the arm that was slung across his chest and cupped the back of her neck. Closing the distance between them, he sucked gently on her bottom lip before covering her mouth fully with his own. His tongue flicked over the seam of her lips, asking for entrance that she was all too willing to grant. He flipped them until he was sprawled out on top of her, supporting the majority of his weight on the arms on either side of her, and deepened the kiss. One of his hands left her side, and began tracking the dips and curves over her body, paying special attention to the nipples that suddenly pebbled underneath her thin sweater. Bella pushed him away with a gasp when the sensations became too much. "Jasper," she panted against his moist lips. "Mum?" he rumbled, nuzzling his face into her neck and lapping gently at her pulse point. An action he knew for a fact drove her wild. Her eyes fluttered shut as she tangled her fingers in his hair and pressed him closer as his tongue was replaced by the gently nibbling of his teeth. She had always secretly thought that encouraging this action, from a vampire of all things, was definite proof that she had a few screws loose in her head, but fear had never factored into it for a single second. There was nowhere she felt safer than in his arms. Shaking her head to clear the fog from her mind and remember what she was going to say, she tugged at his hair until his head rose, only to get lost once again in golden eyes swirling with love and heavy-lidded with lust. Seeing the exact mirror of her own emotions reflected back at her, she swallowed loudly and steeled her resolve. "Jasper," she repeated, tightening her grip on his hair when he attempted to lower his head and kiss her again. A faintly disgruntled look crossed his face, and she found herself grinning when his lower lip poked out in a pout. She exhaled shakily through her nose, and despite the absolute conviction of her next words, they left her lips in a tone only slightly higher than a whisper. "I'm ready." Bella chuckled as she woke, the memory of what had followed thrumming pleasantly through her body. She stretched out lazily on Jasper's soft cotton sheets, luxuriating in the sensations of her body aching in all the right places. Once Jasper had shaken off his stunned expression, spending the next 5 minutes making absolutely certain that she was sure and hadn't simply misspoken in the heat of the moment. It had only been the chill in the cool fall air that had stopped him from taking her right there on the rumpled picnic blanket. Speaking of the blanket, she was quite certain it was still out there, the dishes of food either frozen from the overnight frost or well on their way to being spoiled. Apparently Bella now had the tools at her disposal to render a vampire forgetful. She grinned wickedly. And it was one she planned to use as often as possible. The first time had been a blur of heightened emotions and sensations, pain not even registering amidst the absolute pleasure of being fully connected to him. When he had eased into her, doing his best to be as gentle as possible, it was as if time stopped and everything snapped into place. They were no longer Bella and Jasper in that moment, but a single entity, and it was ecstasy. They took their time the second and third time around, the frenetic pace lost, but not the emotions that went with it. Mapping the contours of their partners' bodies and branding every inch of available skin with their hands and mouths. She didn't know why she waited so long. If she knew this was what awaited her, she would have happily stripped down the first time he kissed her. She had a feeling, though, that it had been the wait, the time they took to truly form a connection and solidify it, that had made it into something special. Something amazing. Her head twisted towards the partially cracked door when she heard a muffled crash, followed by a booming curse, and naturally guessed that Emmett had dropped something in the kitchen where Jasper, the most perfect boyfriend ever, was currently cooking her breakfast. Sliding off the bed, she ignored the shirt that was draped at the foot of it and, with a sudden burst of confidence, plodded naked towards the bathroom, intending to take a quick shower. Damn vampires have it lucky, she thought as she tied her hair up in a loose bun after twisting on the taps. Don't have to worry about gross stuff like sticky sweat and body odor, she yelped as she stepped under the cool spray, reaching out to adjust the water to a slightly warmer setting. Soaping up her body with Jasper's body wash, she pouted at his absence. She had done her best to cajole him into taking a shower with her. But he had resisted, although she could tell he was really reluctant to do so, in order to give her frail human body a chance to recuperate. Okay, so he didn't say it quite like that, but the implication was definitely there. And yes, maybe he was kind of right. Certain muscles did twinge a bit more than they normally did, but she blamed that solely on inactivity, something that could have been easily remedied if he joined her in the shower. Maybe I should look into a yoga class, she mused as she rinsed off. Couldn't hurt to be more flexible. She looked forward to trying to explain that decision to Nan if she ever went through with it. Stepping out of the shower, she dried off with an overly large towel and deposited the damp fabric in the hamper by the door. Before leaving the bathroom, she found herself pausing to inspect herself in the mirror. She had heard people say that they looked different after the first time. Older, more mature, and while she could officially proclaim that a load of BS, she did admit that there were subtle changes. Her eyes sparkled with a newfound awareness, and her skin glowed like it was lit up from the inside. She immediately realized what the true difference was. She was happy, truly and completely. Shooting her reflection a toothy smile, she flicked off the light and headed towards the dresser, located against the opposite side of the room, reaching for the top set of drawers that had been deemed Bella's since summertime. Deciding that since it was the weekend, it was officially going to be a lazy day for her to simply sit around and enjoy some uninterrupted time with her family. Charlie had come to terms a long time ago that weekends were Jasper, Rose, and Emmett time. She slipped a pair of loose yoga pants up her legs, feeling a naughty thrill at forgoing her panties underneath them. She hooked her arms through her bra. She wasn't feeling quite that free. Next, it was plain, pretty much like all of her undergarments. She had never been much of a Victoria's Secret girl, though Rose was steadfastly trying to change that. But the dark green shade of it reminded her a lot of the shirt she had glimpsed Jasper wearing her first day at Forks High. Over that, she pulled on her faded Leonard Skinner t-shirt and released her hair from its sloppy bun. After giving it a few cursory swipes with the hairbrush that had been lying on top of the dresser, she declared herself ready for the day. As her bare feet slapped down on the cool wooden floor, Bella found herself hesitating as her hand curled around the brass doorknob. Things were worked out with Jasper, but she was a little concerned, despite his reassurances that with the Cullens gone, for good this time, that it would somehow change the dynamic between the four of them. Emmett must have heard her pulling open the door because he suddenly yelled, presumably from the kitchen, "Bella, get your overly sexed-up ass down here." "Breakfast is getting cold." Jasper's amused voice floated up next. "Why do you care? It's not like you cooked it." "I helped," he snorted. "Pouring the juice barely counts. Especially considering you broke the first glass of it and we had to clean it up," Rose chimed in. A grin split Bella's face as she bounced down the stairs. Nope. Everything was blissfully still the same. It hadn't been the same since the weekend. Jasper perched on Bella's windowsill, silently taking stock of the house. In the upper level, he could make out Bella's steady heartbeat. He was guessing she was in the bathroom since she obviously wasn't in her room. But the downstairs was quiet, and judging by the lack of a police cruiser in the driveway, Charlie wasn't home yet. Thinking of Charlie caused a ghost of a smile to cross Jasper's pale lips. He had been surprisingly understanding when, after that weekend and perhaps somewhat belatedly, he had learned from Bella that the Cullens had skipped town, citing a family emergency. It had eventually led to a terse phone call later that night, and Jasper, who felt just as bad lying to him as he did Bella, had not told him the whole story. For obvious reasons, but did allude to the rift in their family unit, which culminated with Rose and Emmett's decision to stay behind in Forks to finish out their school year. Though it was never spoken outright, Jasper suspected that Charlie knew that his daughter was the real reason they all stayed behind. Given that the three of them were all legal age, well, technically, according to their doctored birth certificates, Charlie seemed more willing to accept his explanation, even though Bella bemoaned it would take more than a few talks to convince him to let her stay the night. Now that parental supervision was absent, and had even gruffly informed the three of them that, if they needed anything, his door was always open. Jasper was grateful and incredibly touched by the offer. He didn't really remember his father, but he liked to think that he had been a lot like Charlie. The sudden sound of a shower being turned on pulled Jasper back into the moment, and reminded him why he was here. Easing his foot down on the faded carpet, he took another glance around Bella's room and realized he wasn't as alone as he originally thought he was. Though he still couldn't see her, he was still holding out hope that it'd happen eventually, as unlikely as it seemed now. He had gotten really good at sensing when Nan was around. There was a slight staticky feeling in the air whenever she was near, and was usually accompanied by a faint scent, so faint that even with his superior senses he had to strain to register it. Akin to sun-warmed earth. "I know you're here, Nan." He kept his voice hushed. "And not to be rude or anything, ma'am, but I'd kinda like to talk to Belle alone." He paused after he spoke, and in the sudden silence, save for the shower in the background, he was able to pick up the shift in the room that signified her departure. He shrugged off his jacket and perched on the edge of Bella's bed, waiting for her to finish, and desperately trying to push aside the naughty thoughts that came with picturing his mate in the shower. After denying her the first time, she had eventually been able to talk him into taking one with her, and now he'd never been able to even look at one the same way again. After that amazing and most definitely life-changing weekend together, Bella had pulled away from him a little once they had returned to school. She was still cheerful and affectionate, but suddenly she had excuses for not going home with them after school. Not for the night, Charlie wasn't that lenient, and brushing off their attempts to come to her house instead. Jasper had put up with it for the longest 3 days of his life before finally deciding that enough was enough. As much as sneaking in her window while she showered felt borderline stalkerish, especially since he was free to walk through the front door and even had the key to do so. He had fallen back into the same routine during their first few months of courtship. The water cut off a few minutes later, and he could hear her shuffling about in the small room, followed by the bathroom door creaking open and her soft approaching footsteps as she grumbled to herself. "Can't believe I forgot my clothes. How? Eek." Jasper couldn't help the grin that quirked his lips. He had never taken Bella for the girlish scream type. She was touching a hand to her chest, her face scandalized. "How did you get in here?" Apparently he wasn't the only one who forgot he had a key. He only vaguely registered the question, completely entranced at the sight of Bella fresh from the shower. She practically swam in the towels stocked in the bathroom at his house. But the one she wore now had only enough fabric to just barely tuck around her lithe frame. A tantalizing strip of skin flushed a rosy pink from her steamy shower, flashed teasingly every time she shifted. She had forgone the towel around her head, finding the mere practice of doing it too ridiculously girly for her tomboyish taste. And the thick curtain of her hair, darkened to an almost rusted red color by the water that still clung to it, hung around her shoulders, the sopping strands sending rivulets of water creeping down her shoulders. Jasper's eyes followed one of those drops as it veered off course and disappeared down her cleavage, and his mind completely blanked on why he was even here, in the first place, and instead focused on his desire to follow that trail of water with his tongue. An embarrassed giggle broke his concentration, and he was finally able to register the slightly pruny hand that was waving in his face. The movement wafted the air around him, and he was disappointed that Bella no longer smelled of his body wash, but of her lightly peach-scented one instead. As much as he liked the smell, he already missed the scent of himself on her skin. Her hand waved again. "Hello? Earth to starry guy." "I came in through the window," he replied, belatedly answering the question she had asked 5 minutes ago. What happened to the door? Forgot, he answered sheepishly. She moved in the direction of her dresser. Well, why didn't you call to tell me you were coming over? She asked over her shoulder. It would have saved me the potential heart attack. Would you have answered? She froze. Of course I would have. Why would you even ask that? You tell me. She whirled around, her hands on her hips, and Jasper did his best to ignore the fact that the motion caused her towel to slip a bit. Why are you being such an ass? Why have you been avoiding me? He countered. Her arms dropped and her cheeks, still pink from the shower, flushed further. I haven't, she stuttered. Yes, you have, ever since we got back to school. Is this because... do you regret? God, he wasn't sure he could even say it out loud. Just the mere thought that she might regret one of the best moments of his life, the best moment, his mind insisted, would have brought him to his knees if he wasn't already sitting down. She seemed to get the gist of what he was saying, though. No, she gasped. Never. Her shoulders slumped. I was going about it all wrong again, wasn't I? Going about what? She began fiddling with the tattered edge of the towel. I was trying to give you, Rose and Emmett, time to, I don't know, adjust to the Cullens being gone. I thought me being there slowed down your progress. Jasper blinked. Seriously? You've been avoiding me, avoiding us, because you wanted to give us time to bond? His irritation over the situation was quickly being replaced by amusement. She huffed. Or grieve, or something. I told you I don't know. Don't look at me like that, Jasper. I'm serious. Stop laughing. His chuckles died off, but the smile they produced remained. I'm sorry. It's just all this time. I had thought something was really wrong. The smile dimmed. That maybe you weren't ready to take that step with me, and were regretting it. Bella began blinking rapidly, and he scented salt in the air. That was the best decision I ever made, she said, giving him a trembling smile. But obviously, something is wrong. Apparently, I'm the worst girlfriend ever. A tear slipped down her cheek. Hey, Jasper said, pushing himself off the bed. It was nothing more than a misunderstanding. No need to get upset. He gathered her warm body in his arms and rested his cheek against the top of her damp head. I guess we both really need to stop jumping to conclusions, she mumbled into his chest. I think a little leeway should be given, after all. This the first real relationship for both of us. She poked him gently in the stomach. Liar, she hissed, pulling back to glare at him. He shook his head. No, that wasn't a relationship, that was a dictatorship. Her eyes softened and she craned her neck up to brush a kiss on his lips. No more ignoring, he asked when she pulled away. No more, she agreed, properly chastised. He began snickering again, relieved that it had been something so silly and easily resolved. Stop laughing at me, Bella grumbled, laying her head back on his chest. Sorry, I'm just wondering why the hell you thought we needed to bond. Apart from an orgy, the three of us can't get much closer than we already are. Better not, Bella growled, digging her nails into sides. You're mine and only mine. Jasper's eyes darkened. What time is Charlie getting back? He rasped as he turned and began pushing her back towards the bed, his hand rising to tug at the loose knot of her towel. Late, Bella replied huskily. He pulled it free, the grainy fabric dropping to pool at her feet, and grinned wickedly. Perfect. Bella looked down dubiously at the costume spread out on Rose and Emmett's bed. I don't know. Rose. Rose shook her head. Nah, Bella. No weaseling out now. Besides, I have a signed agreement giving me full power of attorney over your costume choice. Bella grimaced. Sadly, she wasn't kidding. After weeks of refusing to commit to an idea, Rose really had written up a contract that Bella had foolishly signed. But in her defense, Jasper had been nuzzling her ear at the time. Don't remind me, Bella grumbled before narrowing her eyes, but I distinctly remember it saying that you would pick it out. This, she said, flailing her arm in the direction of the green fabric, reeks of Emmett. Sorry, Bells, but Em doesn't know anything about it. Bella's eyes widened. The element of surprise made it much, much worse. Just imagining the teasing she'd have to endure set off a dull throbbing behind her right eye. Come on, she whined. I don't even have the right hair color to pull off this costume. She eyed Rosie's blonde locks. But you, on the other hand, that can be easily remedied. No wigs, Bella would concede to a lot of things, just like she knew she'd eventually concede to this, but she refused to wear one of those scratchy synthetic nightmares on her head. Rose frowned playfully. Spoil sport. Madsen, back me up here. She had gotten more comfortable speaking to her out loud in her vampire's presence, and with their understanding had become accustomed to it. Nan glided over to the bed and ran a hand over the lush, velvet fabric. "I think it's cute, Chang." "Whatever happened to bros before Rose?" she complained. Rose snorted. "Clever." She bent down and picked up the costume and held it out towards Bella. "On," she ordered, leaving no room for argument. "Fine," Bella sighed, tugging at the hem of her long-sleeved gray pullover. "Give her here." Bella stared down at her feet as Rose secured her hair into a tight bun before firmly wrapping a light green silk ribbon around the base of it to camouflage the elastic tie that was holding it all together. Wiggling the soft slippers she wore, she grudgingly admitted that the bobbing white pom-poms were beginning to grow on her. The dress she wore fit her to a T and still managed to be one of the most comfortable things she had ever slipped into, next to her pajamas. Seriously, she had known Rose less than a year and had already been coerced into a dress twice. Renee hadn't even been able to get her to wear one to her wedding to Phil. Her view in the mirror was blocked when Rose stepped in front of her, her lower half clad in the beginnings of her costume, a pair of tight, red leather pants. "Eyes up," Rose ordered, reaching for a small jar on the vanity behind her and twisting off the top. Dipping a small brush in the shimmery powder, she cupped Bella's chin. "Close it." Bella did as she was told, blinking them open when Rose finished, and moved to sweep the freshly re-dipped brush along the bottom arch of her eyebrows. Rose turned back to switch the brush to a slightly bigger one, and after reapplying a thin layer of the powder, dusted it across the apples of Bella's cheeks. Bella's lips quirked as Rose's greenish-brown eyes, compliments of a pair of ridiculously expensive, specially made contacts, narrowed in concentration. "You do realize that no one is going to know who you're supposed to be," she pointed out. Rose shrugged, the movement jostling the chunky silver cross lying against her pale collarbone. If they can't recognize the strongest female character to ever grace the small screen, then that's their problem, not mine. She reached for a second tube and, uncapping it, raised the small wand to gently smear a pale pink gloss across Bella's lips. Bella's nose wrinkled. No matter what the shade, the color pink never failed to remind her of Alice. Nope, not her color. Rose, like Jasper, had gotten really good at seemingly reading her mind. Not gaudy enough. "It's all kinds of weird that you're dressing up as Buffy the Vampire Slayer." Bella drew the last two words out slowly. Personally, she thought it was hysterical that Rose had a not-so-secret obsession with vampire shows and movies, especially since it seemed more like something that Emmett would indulge in. The shows amused him and he would gladly watch them for his mate's benefit, but outside of that, he didn't show any particular interest in them. Jasper, on the other hand, hated them and could often be found grumbling in a room as far away from whatever TV was playing them about the misrepresentation of his species. Bella had told him that maybe he should start a protest about it. Call it the Million on Dead Man March, or something. He had not been as amused as she was. "I'm being ironic," Rose replied, twisting around to put the finishing touches on her own makeup. She pointed a blood-red nail towards the bed where the pièce de résistance of Bella's costume should have been laying. Instead, Nan was holding it up with a grin, swirling her finger in a turn-around motion. Bella rolled her eyes but offered Nan her back, shifting her arms and maneuvering them through the thin, transparent straps. "It's not really ironic if only 4 of us know the truth." Rose slipped a plain black tank top over her head. "Well, maybe I just wanted a reason to wear leather pants." She reached towards the vanity and grabbed the final addition to her ensemble, a meticulously carved stake, courtesy of Emmett, and slipped it into the holster, another specially made purchase attached to her upper thigh. "I don't remember her ever having something like that," Bella mused as Nan shifted the delicate fabric on her back into place. "Like your hair, I'm taking liberties with my costume, making it better, really. Wouldn't something like this make more sense than stuffing it on the back of your pants, or up your sleeves?" It was moments like this that Bella could almost truly believe that Rose and Jasper really were twins. Both of them loved nothing more than to point out and deconstruct the inaccuracies or overall stupidity of something. Jasper in anything historical and Rose in TV shows and movies. It was pointless to even attempt to argue with them about it because not only was it a headache waiting to happen, but 99% of the time, they were usually right. Rose nodded at her reflection, pleased with her overall look, and really despite the lack of a Valley Girl tan, she did look eerily similar to the kick-ass female character, and turned to appraise Bella. Bella tugged self-consciously at the short, jagged edge of her dress, certain she looked as foolish as she felt. Rose didn't seem to think so. "Damn, I'm good," she muttered. "You look great," she stepped off to the side. Come see for yourself. Bella, she warned sternly, when she remained rooted to the spot. Bella heaved a heavy sigh and tiptoed her way to the mirror, the white pom-poms on her slippers bobbing with every step. When she finally reached the reflective surface, she had to admit that Rose was right. She was good. Alice may have been the fashionista in the family, but her talents with clothes started and ended with simply wearing them. Rose, on the other hand, was a savant when a needle and thread were in her hands. Her skills with fabrics were only outshined by her skills with vehicles, but because cars were her first passion, she didn't indulge in this one as often as she did the other. But when she did, it was magic. Yes, the dress Bella wore was simple in its design, but to copy it from the original, a cartoon no less, as faithfully as she had, and not taking the easy route out and choosing a cheap, stretchy material, and for it to fit like a glove, took real talent. The soft, velour-like fabric in a surprisingly pretty shade of pea green cut tight across her chest, its strapless bodice curving over her breasts and forming an almost circular M shape. It flared out slightly at the hips and ended in a jagged triangular pattern all around the bottom hem, which sat at roughly mid-thigh. Her smooth, pale legs were bare down to her feet, which were clad in dainty ballet flats consisting of the same pea-green fabric. Each were topped with a fuzzy, bright white pom-pom that had been sturdily sewn onto them. From her back stretched sparkly, gossamer wings that were a decent size but still not large enough to be obstructive in any way. The powder Rose had applied highlighted her eyes and cheekbones and cast a shimmery glow to her face that was reminiscent of the glow her vampires had. Bella decided she quite liked the effect. Well, Rose prodded, other than the hair, Bella was the exact replicate of the fairy from Peter Pan. I look good, Bella admitted. Good enough that it was almost worth the eventual ribbing she'd get from Emmett. Of course you do. Would I steer you wrong? Bella snorted. 2-word, Brazilian, wax. Rose reached across the vanity to grab a small clear bottle, and in the mirror, Bella could see her smirk. Pretty sure Jasper appreciated it, she snarked. Bella's face bloomed with color, and in the background she could hear Nan humming loudly to herself. She may have come to terms with the fact that her great-granddaughter had a healthy sex life, but that didn't mean she liked hearing about it, at least not in that kind of detail. Rose straightened up and flipped up the top of the bottle she held. One more thing. Hold out your hand. What is it? Bella asked suspiciously. Rose rolled her eyes. Glitter lotion. Now put 'em up. Bella dutifully raised her hand. You just keep this stuff lying around? She asked, accepting a cool, medium-sized glob of it on her outstretched palm. You don't really seem the type. Are you kidding? If I wanted to sparkle, I'd just take a stroll in the sunlight. I brought this stuff for you, for your costume, I should say. You really commit, don't you? Bella said, raising her hand towards her face, fully intending to sniff it before she rubbed in on her skin. Jasper's sensitive nose was irritated by the smell of overly harsh chemicals, particularly of the flowery kind, especially on her. Not that he needed to be concerned. She didn't really care for perfume anyways. It's unscented, Rose confirmed before she had even taken the first whiff. Rubbing it between her hands, Bella rubbed the glittery lotion up the skin of her arms and, as an afterthought, across the bare expanse of her upper chest. Might want to go wash your hands off, Rose advised, shrugging on a short, tight black leather jacket. Bella nodded, cutting across the room and heading towards the large private bath that was connected to the bedroom. Flicking the light on, she crossed over to the sink and adjusted the taps until warm water was gushing out. Sticking her hands under the stream, she began washing the excess lotion off. Hey, she called out. What are Emmett and Jasper dressed as? You'll see, Rose sing-songed, and Bella could hear the humor in her voice. She hoped to God Jasper hadn't been forced to match her. As much as she was certain that he could pull the look off, no man should be forced into green tights. Twisting the tap off, she dried her hand on the towel hanging next to the sink and took a moment to mentally prepare herself for the Tinkerbella jokes that were sure to follow that night. Ready? Bells? Coming, Bella shouted back. Pausing at the door, she cast a final glance at the mirror, admiring the way the overhead light sparkled subtly off the lotion on her skin. This is how I'll look when I'm a vampire, Bella thought mildly, and at that moment she could see her future mapped out. An eternity by her vampire's sides as she realized that, not even in the beginning, had it been a matter of if when it came to being a vampire. No. It had always been when the concern Bella had about being teased was rendered moot the second she got halfway down the stairs and saw what was waiting at the bottom, because even if Emmett had poked fun at her, She wasn't able to hear it over her screaming laughter. Her matching fears had been correct. She had just had the wrong couple. There in all his glory was not Buffy's brooding, souled counterpart, a look Emmett probably could have pulled off. But the conflicted bad boy instead, if said bad boy had been built like a linebacker, that is. It had kicked off when Emmett yelled, "Allo," in what was quite possibly the worst British accent Bella had ever heard, the booming qualities causing her to misstep and stumble slightly on the stairs. Propping herself up against the wall, she shot him a glare, the retort dying on her tongue as she was practically blinded by the glow of Emmett's newly bleached blonde hair. So overdone, it looked almost white. "It's so blonde," Bella stuttered. She knew it wasn't permanent. Color, even of the peroxided sort, didn't really take in vampire hair, acting instead like it had been dyed with Crayola washables and rinsing out in the next shower. Rose had likened it a bit to Claudia from Interview with a Vampire when she had tried to cut her hair off. Only instead of being instantaneous, there was a slight time lapse of no more than 12 hours before it simply faded. If for some reason they didn't shower before then, unlike Claudia though. Cutting their hair gave them a bit more of a respite, usually taking a few weeks to grow back. Bella had been joking when she teased Rose about being committed, but she had no qualms about who exactly it was to convince Emmett to dress up like this, and it appeared that she took Halloween dead serious. No pun intended. It started out as a titter, which turned into a chuckle, which quickly progressed into braying laughter. "You look like Eminem," she howled, losing her footing and falling forward, thankfully into Nan's open arms. She didn't even bother trying to right herself, instead keeping her hands wrapped loosely around Nan's shaking shoulders as the two shared their mirth. She was sure she looked a sight, hovering precariously over the stairs at an angle, especially if the look of panic on Jasper's face was anything to go by. Nen, she explained in between gasps of air, Wilding waving away his attempt to climb the stairs. She attempted to compose herself, pushing away from Nan in the process, and had almost succeeded until she heard Emmett mutter, in that same terrible accent, "Bloody wankers," before storming off towards the living room. Jasper, shaking his head with a slight grin on his face, had followed him. Another bark of laughter escaped her lips, and she bent at the waist, fighting off the tears that prickled her eyes. Rose would kill her if she messed up her makeup. No more, she begged helplessly as her giggles tapered off. She felt a gentle pat on her back and looked up at Rose, who managed to look both amused and ticked off. "I'm almost insulted. I put a lot of work into that look." "I'm sorry," Bella replied, straightening up and smoothing out the creases she had put in the fabric of her dress. She reached over her shoulder to check to see that her wings were still in place. The clothes were great. What little she could remember of the all-black ensemble with the barest hint of red, really spot on. But the hair, her lips wobbled. "How did you even get him to agree to that?" Rose grinned wickedly. "I promised him we could play Buffy the Vampire Slayer afterwards. So does that mean you'll be the one getting staked tonight?" Bella's eyes widened. "I can't believe I just said that." "No," she yelped, throwing her hands up when it looked like Rose was going to reply. "I don't want to know." Rose smirked. "I'm gonna go soothe Emmett's shattered ego." Bella winced. "Sorry," she said for the second time. Rose shrugged. "He'll live. Besides, this is not the worst costume he's ever worn." Bella's eyes lit up. "Ooh, what is?" "Don't even think about it, Rosie," Emmett yelled from the living room. "Sorry, Bella. He made me pinky swear," Rose explained as she glided down the stairs. "Coming?" she asked, looking up at Bella. "Be right there," Bella replied, biting her lip as she shot a look to her side. Rose nodded in understanding and disappeared around the corner. There, monkey man," she heard Rose kurr. "You coming with us?" Bella asked Nan, eyeing the dress draping her frame. Nan was probably the only woman she knew who could wear a jack-o'-lantern dress and get away with it. Halloween had always been her favorite holiday when she had been alive. She had quickly gained a reputation for having the best treats and best scares in town, and every year she always had a new themed dress to celebrate it. The pumpkin one she was currently wearing had always been Bella's favorite. On Halloween? You know better than that. She knew that Nan considered this day the perfect excuse to cause a little perfectly harmless mischief. Her favorite pastime being to put the fright into bullies who harassed kids into giving them their candy. Bella sighed. She also knew better than to try and talk her out of it, especially when she had encouraged it in the past. "Just promise me you won't make anyone wet their pants this year. That kind of thing will damage a person for life." She heard a faint snort from the direction of the living room, and had the feeling that Jasper was probably wondering what the hell they were talking about. That was an accident, Nan huffed. And he shouldn't have been stealing candy in the first place. Him and his group of friends were grown men, for goodness sakes. Besides, I don't remember you complaining when I got your candy back. Now did I? There was 3 whole chocolate bars in there. Do you know how rare it is for someone to give out a regular-sized chocolate bar, let alone 3? Bella blinked. And I can't believe I'm having this argument with you. Go. Shoo. Have fun and don't get into trouble. Nane's brow arched wryly. Isn't that my line? She leaned over and placed a light kiss on Bella's cheek just below the shimmering powder. Have fun, Chime, and get into trouble. She winked cheekily and disappeared. Bella chuckled as she descended the steps and aimed herself towards the living room, only to be snatched off to the side the second she stepped through the archway. Did I tell you how amazing you look in that outfit, Bella? Or should I say Tinkerbella? Bella rolled her eyes but pressed a nibbling kiss to Jasper's lips. At least you said it before Emmett got a chance to. Speaking of costumes, she wondered if Jasper had somehow gotten his hand on her journal and read about her desire to see him decked out in full cowboy gear. On his casual days, when he felt the urge to break out the hat or his boots, sometimes both, it was usually enough to make her girly parts flutter, but seeing the full enchilada was just about sending her body into anaphylactic shock. She skimmed her hand down the sage-colored fabric of his button-up shirt, pausing to fiddle slightly with the top 2 undone buttons before trailing her hand down to trace the large, bowl-shaped buckle located at his hips. Gripping the heavy metal in her hands, she leaned back slightly and admired the dark brown leather chaps that covered his legs. Releasing the belt buckle, she took a step back and twirled her finger in the air. Give us a little spin, cowboy, she said primly, batting her eyelashes. He shot her a heated smirk before doing as requested, keeping his pace slow enough so that she could as thoroughly admire the back as she did the front. Ma'am, he drawled thickly when he faced her again, tipping the cowboy hat, the same brown color of his chaps, down low over his eyes. The look that accompanied the action made her want to throw herself in his arms and say, "Screw the bar." From behind him came a loud gagging noise that officially broke the moment. Later, Jasper mouthed, licking his lips for good measure, and sending a nerve-wracking shiver down her spine. Over his shoulder she could see a pouting Emmett sprawled out on the couch, who clearly didn't appreciate all the love that Jasper was getting for his costume, leaning his head against a smirking Rose's shoulder as she ran a hand through his atrociously colored hair. He looks like a complete tool, Jasper agreed, doing his best to whisper it out of the side of his mouth, even though he knew full well Emmett would hear him. I hate you all, Emmett grumbled petulantly. Next year's costumes are my choice. He raised his head to shoot Bella a borderline sinister look. All of them. Bella met his gaze challengingly. Hey, Jax, what's the worst costume Emmett's ever had? She asked loudly. Emmett's eyes widened. Jasper smirked approvingly. Easy. Malibu Barbie. What happened to the sanctity of the pinky swear? Emmett yelled. What? Bella sputtered, the visual alone practically frying her brain. Why would he even... He lost a bet he shouldn't have made in the first place, Jasper replied, smugly. Please tell me you have pictures. An entire photo album, Jasper promised. Emmett slumped back onto the couch, admitting total defeat. At least I had the legs to pull it off, he replied, staring down at the black jean-clad legs stretched out before him. You were definitely convincing enough for that man to hit on you. Jasper paused, tapping his chin in mock thought. What was his name again? Emmett mumbled something under his breath. What was that? Jasper goaded. Rose giggled, answering for him. Chocolate St. Clair. Jasper turned back to Bella. That was his real name, too, by the way. On his driver's license and everything. The 3 vampires shared a laugh of remembrance, and Bella decided that nothing would make her happier than to spend every Halloween just like this for the rest of her life. She must have been projecting because a cool hand suddenly brushed her cheek. What are you thinking right now, darlin'? Bella watched as Emmett stood, pulling Rose up with him and obediently standing still as she fussed with the collar of his admittedly awesome leather duster. Looking back into Jasper's glowing amber eyes, she smiled softly. They had time before they needed to have a serious discussion about the future. But now it was time to simply enjoy the present. Nothing. Just really happy. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Collar finally straightened, Emmett declared. Let's get this party started. Let me go grab something, Jasper said, darting out of the room and returning seconds later with his distressed leather jacket slung over his arm. Let me help you out of those wings, Belle. Why? She asked, but agreeably shifted her arms back. It's cold out. You'll need a jacket, and unless you plan on lying on your stomach, you'll have to take them off before you get in the car anyways. He slipped them off her shoulder and replaced it with the jacket he had slung over his arm. What about you? Not that he really needed a jacket anyways. Got it covered, he replied, handing her the wings. He snatched up a jacket, similar to Emmett's duster, but in a brown that was a shade or two lighter than his chaps, that she hadn't noticed had been resting on the back of the couch, and slid it smoothly over his shoulders. The supple leather fabric swept around his calves and added with the jangle of the spurs on his boots as he walked. Bella could almost swear she was back in the Wild West. He took the wings back from her and after gently folding them, offered her his arm. Shall we? We shall, Belle agreed, looping her arm with his and entwining their fingers as he led them towards the door. Hey, Bells? Emmett asked as the three stood on the porch waiting for Rose to grab Bella's forgotten and still very fake ID out of her wallet. About your costume? Here it goes, Bella thought, bracing herself for some form of the same tired line Jasper had already taken a shot at. Yes, Emmett. Why the hell are you dressed as Edward? I think it's a little unfair that you're hunting a bear while they're prepping for hibernation. They're not exactly at their peak right now. Emmett smiled faintly. Really? I never would have guessed. Bella's eyes slammed shut when her brain finally caught up with her mouth and she remembered the conversation she'd had with Jasper the night after Emmett's birthday party. Is it just me, or was Emmett strangely subdued tonight? He had been properly excited in the beginning, geeking out over the vintage game console she had gotten for a steal on eBay, but as the night progressed, he had grown quiet, almost introspective. It had been a very different change from the guy who'd been whirling her around the room and singing at the top of his lungs on her own birthday. Jasper sighed heavily. His birthday has always been a difficult time for him, he admitted. Why? You remember when Emmett told you about his turning that day in the forest? Bella nodded. How could she forget something as brutal as that? When it came to her vampires, it seemed that peaceful death was very much an oxymoron. Well, there are a few details he skimmed over. Suddenly, I was mauled to death by a bear, had turned into a newly 19-year-old Emmett being out hunting for a turkey for Thanksgiving dinner, only to stumble across something that definitely was not what he'd been looking for. It had to be quite the emotional upheaval to be reminded of your death only 2 days after you were supposed to be celebrating your birth. I'm so sorry, Em, she apologized meekly. He shrugged. It's okay, Bells, really. It doesn't bother me anymore. I got over it a long time ago. She knew that wasn't entirely the truth, considering that the three of them ran upstate and put a small dent in the black bear population every year when this particular holiday rolled around. Jasper had told her about it that same night and how they had done it for the last 50-odd years, as a small way to somehow bridge the two events, albeit in a morbid way. It had been Jasper's idea, and in the beginning it had been used as a way to help Emmett cope with the misery he usually felt, and thanks to his gift, Jasper as well, around those days. And now it was considered a tradition. Despite the semi-dark reason for said tradition, judging by the glint in Emmett's eyes when he talked about the upcoming trip, she suspected he enjoyed it more than he liked to admit, especially when she learned it was essentially the focal point for the unbreakable bond that the three of them would eventually share. It's why she encouraged the three of them to take the trip when they seemed reluctant to do so. They had offered her a chance to come along, but Charlie had made the potentially disastrous decision to host a Thanksgiving dinner and invite Renee and the new husband he had never met. Even worse, they had agreed. So as much as she would have loved to go, someone had to stay and play Reaffirmation. Besides, she owed it to Charlie to spend this holiday with him. It'd be the first one since the Christmas she'd spent in Forks 2 years ago. She practically had to cajole the others into leaving, though, telling them that if they stayed, Charlie would most definitely expect them at dinner, and they couldn't sit around and pretend to eat for 2 hours, especially not with Renee watching their every move. Besides, it was only for 2 days. She was sure she could manage. Thanksgiving, so, need me to do anything? Bella could tell by the hesitant way he asked that he was really hoping she'd say no. No, Charlie, go, shoo, watch the game or something. She wouldn't have even let him if he wanted to, not when he pretty much burnt everything he touched. She's not exactly sure how he even survived before she got here, but she largely suspected that the words Swanson and microwave had something to do with it. While her cooking wouldn't necessarily draw acclaim from Gordon Ramsay, she still knew enough to put together a pretty decent Thanksgiving dinner, Besides, she had a secret weapon. Gone then. The pies currently cooling on the rack had been her creation, made possible when Charlie had disappeared for an hour to check in on something at work, as was the stuffing currently cooking away happily in the turkey. Bella had risen an hour earlier than usual to start. Speaking of the turkey, check on that, will you, Nan? Bella asked when she finally heard the sounds of the game blaring from the other room. She snuck a harried glance at the clock, noting that supper would be done in about an hour and a half and that Renee and Phil were due within the next hour or so. Everything appeared to be ahead of schedule, the vegetables already set out on the burners and ready to be turned on, so she decided to pass at least a few minutes by setting the table. Her movements were slightly sluggish, thanks to the throbbing ache located in her chest. Jasper had told her it might be like this, and while the sensation was tolerable, every twinge reminded her that he was hundreds of miles away. She couldn't complain, though. She'd been the one that encouraged him to go. "You all right, Chen?" Nan asked as she closed the door to the oven. Bella realized that she had stopped setting the table and instead had her face burrowed into the neck of the large navy blue sweater. Jasper had let her borrow before he left, promising her that it'd ease the ache some. He said he had something of hers too, but wouldn't tell her what, which meant she probably didn't want to know. She rooted around for his chocolatey cinnamon scent and allowed it to soothe her nerves. "Just missing him," she sighed softly. They'll be back before you know it. Yeah, all I have to do is survive this dinner first." Bella scrapped back a chair and plopped heavily into it. "I don't want her here," she admitted tightly, cradling her head in her hands. "Why don't you?" Nan asked, her tone not the least bit judgmental. "Everything's been pretty much perfect since the Cullens left, and I don't want to experience the feeling of being under the microscope again," accompanied by a lingering sense of irritation and burden. "You know, until I met those four, I seriously thought only Renee was capable of that combination." She had never come out and said it directly, but there was a few times when Bella got the feeling that Renee wished she hadn't been born. In the early years of her childhood, it hadn't been as obvious, what with Nan around to fill in the gaps that Renee's disinterest in being a mother had left. But when Nan had died, it wasn't as easy to ignore that Renee was only around when the timing suited her and showed just enough interest in her daughter's life to make it look good to the outside world. As much as it hurt, she always told herself that it could have been worse, that Renee could have worked out her frustrations with her fists instead of with words and indifference. She pushed back from the table and stood to resume setting it. "I don't want her to tear down everything I've built up here, Nana." "It's only for 2 days, Chame," Nan pointed out. 3 at the most." "That's practically a lifetime in Renee speak," she replied bitterly, lining up the fork next to the knife she had just placed down, and then adjusting it once more when she decided it didn't look right. Nan's face was pained when she answered. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more to protect you from all that hate she harbored." "It wasn't so much hate as it was indifference, Natso. Besides, after you..." She cleared her throat, uncomfortably. "I'm pretty sure it wasn't your job anymore." "Oh, but it was, Shem. I'm not just here to look after you when it comes to the big stuff, but the small stuff as well. I think that more than anything, it was the small stuff that made me stay." Bella froze. "Made you..." She swallowed thickly. "Man, I'm not keeping you here, am I? I'm not forcing you to be here, am I?" She realized that even after all these years, this had never been brought up in conversation. She had always tiptoed the subject of Nan's death anyways, and to her it had simply been, Nan's here, that's all that matters. Suddenly the thought that she was keeping her from moving on, keeping her from an afterlife that may or may not exist, made her sick to her stomach. You clear that thought from your mind, this instance, Isabella Marie. Since when has anyone forced me to do anything? Where the hell do you think you get your stubborn streak from? I'm here because I need to be here. Because I want to be here, and that's all that's important. She hesitated. Should that desire ever make itself known? Know that I would never just disappear on you, sweetheart. I'd talk it over with you first. The fact that Nane had tacked that on at the end made Bella think that there was a very large chance that something would be happening in the foreseeable future. She was as certain of this as she was that her vampires would inadvertently be the reason behind it. Ever since they had extended the branch of friendship, she had felt the dependency she had on Nan's companionship fade a little more each day. It was still there, but nowhere near the I don't know what I'll do without her strength it once was. She found herself thinking about it once or twice, more so after summer, trying to decipher how she really felt about the possibility. She wasn't happy about it, obviously, but at the same time there wasn't a sense of panic like there would have been if she had asked herself the same question a year earlier. For now, she'd leave it. She already had too many thoughts and concerns whirling in her mind at the moment, and fall back onto the humor and jokes she knew best. You wouldn't have happened to listen to Jasper's speech that day the Cullens left for good, would you? Nan shot her a questioning look. No, why? He pretty much said thing to me about him, Rose and Emmett staying behind. Well, then maybe you should listen. Stubborn, remember? Bella retorted cheekily. She laid the final utensil on the table, grimacing when she looked up at the clock and realized that a task that should have only taken her 5 minutes to do had taken 30. She figured she had just enough time to start the vegetables and take a shower. Putting the burner on a low setting, she quickly checked the turkey and perused the kitchen to make sure that everything was done. Everything is fine, Chime, Nan attempted to soothe. Quit worrying. Bella snorted. When it came to Renee, all she could do was worry. Worry about whether or not she would come home when she went out. Worry about whether she'd have a strange man with her if she did, and worry what would happen when Renee couldn't keep a steady job. Nan had actually been the one to initially encourage her to move to Forks after things started getting serious between Renee and Phil. She'd been concerned Bella was going to worry herself into an early grave. And now, after months of being worry-free, all it took was one visit from Renee to bring it all back. God, I wish Jasper was here. She could really go for a heaping dose of calm right now. The minute she thought his name, it felt like his hand had brushed her cheek, leaving a trace of cinnamon in the air. She eyed the apple pie sitting on the counter, which was flavored with a more than healthy dose of cinnamon because Nan knew Renee hated the stuff, and shook her head for being so silly. But she had to admit she did feel a little less tense than she did a minute ago. With one last glance at the stove to make sure she hadn't set the burners too high, she walked out of the kitchen and headed for the stairs, yelling, "Keep an eye on the stove," as she ascended them. She heard a loud grunt from the vicinity of the living room, where Charlie was no doubt enthralled with the game. Not like it mattered. She was talking to Nan anyways. The air felt different when she got out of the shower. Thicker, something that definitely wasn't attributed to the steam that clouded the small bathroom. Bella found herself dressing slower, taking more time than she had originally intended. She had wrestled briefly with the obligation she felt to make an effort for Renee and the special occasion in general, and put on something a little more dressy. Even Charlie had come downstairs earlier, wearing a navy blue button-down shirt she'd never seen before, but decided as long as she didn't wear one of her band shirts and the jeans with the holes in the knees, then it wasn't necessary to step outside her comfort zone just to please her. As she pulled Jasper's loose sweater back on over the white tank top she wore, she absently noted that if she had been celebrating this holiday with her vamps instead, she would have given more serious consideration to dressing up. That they never really would have expected it of her is what made the difference. She never felt like she had to do anything out of obligation for them. Pulling on a pair of dark wash jeans, she finished the look with a pair of mismatched socks, 1 stars, 1 stripes, and twisted her damp hair into a thick braid. Nan was waiting for her when she exited the bathroom, and from the sound of not only 1 but 4 voices drifting up the stairs, she already knew what she was going to tell her. "Fashionably late, Renee, is early," she joked. She hovered for a few minutes at the top of the stairs as she waited for the 4th voice. A friend of Charlie's who had been in the Port Angeles area around the same time Renee and Phil's flight got in and offered to drive them here, to say their goodbyes and the conversation to move into the living room before making her way downstairs. When Bella re-entered the kitchen, she saw Renee puttering around, poking at various items and doing her best to look like she knew her way around a kitchen, when the truth was that Charlie's lack of cooking skills put hers to shame. Nan had always done the cooking, and when she had passed, it had fallen to Bella. "Hello, Mother," Bella said warily, deciding that since it was the holidays, she'd use the more parent-friendly name. "Bella," Renee greeted, giving her a critical once-over. "You've gained weight." Bella gritted her teeth, biting her tongue against the caustic words she was tempted to shoot back. "Why, yes, Renee. Now that I no longer have to worry about looking after you, I can finally look after myself." Most girls would probably freak out to see the numbers on the scale rising, but all Bella felt was relief in knowing that she was finally gaining back the much-needed pounds she had progressively lost after Nan died. Thank God Nan had set up a trust fund for the house, not to mention one for Bella and only for Bella to keep the bills paid, or she'd have wasted away. Nan had set up the not overly excessive but definitely healthy fund before she died, enabled by her late husband's lucrative career as a very successful carpenter and some sound investing skills. It allotted money that ensured all the bills would be paid, which allowed them to live quite comfortably. But after Nan's house had burnt to the ground, Renee had been determined to move up, and although Nan's will stipulated that the bills would continue to be paid, regardless of where they lived, the sudden increase in the amount now with an added rent that they hadn't had to pay before since Nan owned the house. They had practically depleted the trust Nan had set up in a few short years. Rather than ask Charlie for help, at least any more than the child support payments he already sent, Bella had gotten an after-school job, so they wouldn't have to dip in what was left any more than necessary. Nan had been furious, not only at Renee, but herself, for not making the terms clearer. It certainly would have helped when Renee had been able to convince the lawyer that handled the funds that a $40,000 car was a necessary expense so she could get to and from her job, that she ended up quitting a month later. Bella had always thought that her latching on to Phil, a minor league and relatively successful ball player, as quickly as she had been anything but love. He had miraculously appeared in her life just when things were getting tight, and the bill collectors were a few months away from burning up their phone lines, and now it looked like all that added security was going to her head. Speaking of head, her mother's once auburn locks were dyed a startling shade of brassy platinum, which did not work for her at all, completely overwhelming the tan color of her skin and making it look almost orange in comparison. Her makeup was impeccably done, but to Bella it looked like it had been applied with a heavy hand by someone who assumed another layer hid the signs of aging. The sight of it saddened her, because Renee was still considerably young, still 2 years shy from 40, and, although they clashed more often than not, she couldn't deny that her mother was an attractive woman, but the makeup hindered that instead of improving on it. As for her clothes, her mother had always dressed younger than her age, showing off her figure in skirts, tight jeans, and form-fitting shirts, but now she looked like one of those nouveau rich people, dressed to the nines in a wine-colored shirt and a pair of off-white slacks. She had a diamond necklace around her neck, the matching earrings dangling from her lobes, and gold bangle bracelets on her right wrist. Now, Bella didn't really know Phil all too well, not with the practically breakneck speed that his and Renee's relationship had progressed, but she knew that his semi-successful career could only allow him a slightly above-average pay grade. Comfortable, definitely, but nowhere near enough to finance an extravagant lifestyle. "You look good," Bella lied through her teeth. "Is that designer?" Renee preened under the attention. "Of course, Phil insists I have the best." "I'll bet he does," Bella thought, skirting around Renee so she could drain the potatoes. She wondered if Renee still hid her credit card bills in her underwear drawer. She dumped the drained potatoes in a large plastic bowl and rustled through the utensil drawer for the brand new masher she had borrowed from her vamp's kitchen before they left. Why they even had the damn thing, she had no idea. The Cullens were clearly dedicated to playing human. Some might say to almost extreme levels. That same fanatic touch would certainly explain the 5 packages of unused toilet paper stored at the back of the towel closet she'd stumbled upon. One day when she'd been exploring, snooping. Obviously she was grateful that it was there if she needed it, but the fact that it hadn't been bought for her, or any human for that matter, was just plain weird. She slowly mashed the potatoes before transferring 3 large spoonfuls to a separate bowl. She grabbed the milk from the fridge and, as she passed by the table, placed the smaller bowl of potatoes in the center. Twisting off the cap, she prepared to pour it over the steaming potatoes in the bowl, still on the counter. "I don't like cream potatoes," Renee complained. Bella continued her task, slicing off a pat of butter to add to the mix. "I know," she pointed to the smaller bowl that Renee had clearly seen her set on the table. "Those are yours." She sighed when Renee huffed and mumbled out something that might have been thanks. "Look," she said, turning around. "I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but dinner won't be done for another 10 minutes at least. So could you—" She motioned at the kitchen entrance, her intent clear. The look on Renee's face clearly implied that she did think Bella was being rude, but she didn't care. She could barely concentrate knowing that Renee was staring at her back. "I'll call you when it's done." Renee's voice was tight when she replied, "Fine." She tilted her chin up and strolled regally out of the kitchen, her high heels clicking against the linoleum as she went. Bella grimaced as she turned back to the counter. She hadn't been hoping for a miracle, but she'd at least thought that marriage would have chilled Renee's attitude out some, but it looked like the only thing that had changed about Renee was the clothes and the color of her hair. "This should be fun. How's school going?" "Good." "Make any friends?" "A few." When talking to Renee, it was best to keep your response as monosyllabic as possible, as to give her less ammo to work with. "I haven't talked to you since you moved. And that's the best you can do. I tried calling your cell. Renee had removed the home phone the year before, declaring it pointless after they both got cell phones. Oh, well, I changed to a new service provider months ago. They gave me a much better deal. That number has been disconnected since February. And you didn't even think to tell your own daughter this? Charlie seemed to have the same thought, because his conversation with Phil ground to a halt. You have a different number? He asked reproachfully. Why didn't you tell me that? He glanced over at the list of numbers tacked to the wall. Bella knew that the cop in him wanted to know how to get a hold of everyone whenever and wherever he needed. Even from here, she could see the additions in her own handwriting. Jasper, 555, Rosier 55, 7827, Emmett, 55, Renee huffed. I forgot. I've been very busy in between decorating the house and traveling with Phil. Phil's cheeks flushed slightly at being pulled into the conversation. Traveling? Charlie repeated. All the more reason that your daughter should have your number. Her parents weren't often in the same room, but when they were, Bella could see why their marriage hadn't lasted. She wasn't the only one who sensed a fight brewing, as Phil cleared his throat uncomfortably. I suppose it's just as much my fault, he said, good-naturedly. I have been on the road a lot this season. Renee and I will make sure to leave both our numbers before we go. He flashed a tentative smile at Bella, which she returned weakly, appeased slightly by his efforts to dissuade the situation. Renee didn't look particularly pleased at being called out, even if Phil had taken most of the blame for something that wasn't really his fault in the first place. But she let the matter settle as she speared a thin slice of the turkey she had painstakingly diced at the beginning of the meal. So, these friends of yours? She asked, chewing slowly. Bella knew Charlie was doing his best to encourage neutral conversation, but she couldn't stop her jaw from ticking slightly when he interjected, Yeah. Are you sure they didn't want to come? We have plenty of food. Bella's friends were just that, hers, and she wasn't sure how much she wanted to share with Renee, or even if she wanted to share. They're not even in town, she reminded him, lips quirking slightly at the disappointment that flashed across his face. When she'd first told him that they'd be away over the break, he had been genuinely upset that they weren't going to be joining them. Renee's perfectly manicured hand wrapped around the stem of her wine glass and raised it to her lips so she could take a large swallow of the ruby liquid inside. Oh? Are you so close that you invited them to a family dinner? They are my family, Bella wanted to scream. Charlie shrugged. They're good kids. What are their names? Bella sighed. There was obviously no escaping this. Jasper and Rosie Hale and Emmett McCarty. Renee finally set the wine glass down. And which one of them are you dating? Bella's fork clattered to the plate. Excuse me? She choked out. No one says names with that much affection if they weren't dating one of them. I'm assuming it's that Jason fellow since you said his name first. Jasper, she gritted out. Renee waved her hand dismissively. Just be careful. It's probably all sunshine and rainbows now. The next thing you know, you'll find yourself pregnant and stuck in this two-bit town for the rest of the life. Charlie's knuckles whitened as they tightened around his fork. Funny, I remember you skipping this two-bit town the second you had the chance. Renee scoffed. It's not like you tried to stop me. Fury was simmering in his eyes, and his voice was tight when he answered. Like hell, I didn't. She sneered. And besides, it's not like I got out scot-free. And there it was, that subtle reminder that Bella had ruined or almost ruined her life. She was actually surprised it had taken Renee this long to get a jab in. She had stopped being surprised at how much it continued to hurt a long time ago. Bella had never seen Charlie raise his voice before, or even get mad for that matter, but she instinctively knew he was minutes away from exploding. I'm not going to put up with this a moment longer, Bella heard Nan say, before the gravy bowl mysteriously tipped off the edge of the table and splattered onto the lap of the person, pissin' closest to it. Renee jumped up with a shriek, frantically rubbing at the stain, seemingly ignorant to the fact that she was only making it worse. Phil pushed back from his seat on the opposite side of the table and scrambled around to Renee. Unfortunately, in his haste, his feet slipped on some of the gravy that had fallen to the ground, and he toppled backwards, grabbing at the nearest thing. Renee, to steady himself, proved to be useless, and he brought the both of them crashing to the floor. Any hold Bella had over her humor disappeared, as the two squirmed around on the gravy-smeared linoleum, one moaning in pain, and the other still shrieking, and she broke into hysterical giggles. Even Charlie looked like he was fighting the urge to laugh. Renee jumped to her feet, landing her foot in Phil's gut in the process, and whirled to face Bella. You planned this, she shrieked. You little... The amusement immediately disappeared from Charlie's face. Don't even think about finishing that sentence, he warned. And don't even think about blaming this on Bella, either. You were the last one with the gravy dish. You obviously set it too close to the edge. He rose to his feet and offered a hand to Man, now clutching his stomach on the floor. You okay? Fine, Phil grunted as he stood, flushing in embarrassment as his hand touched the back of his pants and came away covered in gravy. Bathroom? First door at the top of the stairs, Charlie directed. Phil nodded and slunk out of the kitchen, doing his best to keep his gravy soaked backside to the wall. Watching him, Bella felt other bubble of laughter rise up, only to have it choked off by the caustic look in Renee's eyes. It reminded her a little too much of the way Alice used to stare at her whenever she thought the others weren't looking. The only difference between the two was that she knew why Alice hated her. Why do you hate me? She wanted to ask. Frustration, anger, and misery boiling up in her, a nauseating cocktail that stirred the contents of her stomach. Dimly she registered that Renee's mouth was moving, that her face was contorted in anger, but she didn't hear anything other than the rush of white noise in her ears, as her vision blurred with tears. Can I be excused? She barked out over the din of her parents arguing, not intending for it to be a question at all, as she pushed the chair hard enough away from the table to send it crashing to the floor as she stood. She turned on her heel and ran towards the front door, sweeping a hand out in the direction of the key pegs on the entryway wall, and grabbing the set to her truck. Bella, she heard a voice yell, but she was already outside, slamming the door behind her hard enough to shake the frame and taking the steps 2 at a time. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she had to get away. Jasper leaned up against a tree, his fingers stroking the lacy fabric secreted away in the pocket of his jeans. His lips quirked as he pictured Bella's reaction. If she found out he'd stolen a pair of her underwear, no doubt that delectable blush would spread over her cheeks, trailing down her neck and disappearing in the dipped collar of her. He shifted and snatched his hands out of his pocket. Touching them only led to naughty thoughts anyways, and a temptation to go to her, and they were only into the first day of their trip. He had already gotten a bear, and declared himself done. Usually he was up for at least 2 or 3. But he was getting tired of having to bite through all that thick, mussy fur. It made the blood incredibly unappetizing. He considered pulling his cell phone out and calling her, or texting her, anything to re-establish a connection, but sighed when he realized it'd be pointless. Though the cabin they were staying at was within range of a tower, just barely, this part of the woods was not. He promised himself that he'd call her as soon as they got back. His hand rubbed across the fabric of his chest, right over the spot that covered his unbeating heart, doing his best to soothe away the persistent throb. This had been the first time he'd been away from his Belle since they both fully accepted the bond, and he wasn't coping too well. If this is what it was like only a few hours away from her, in vampire speed at least, he imagined that if they had gone any further, the pain would be inching closer to excruciating. He could deal with it just fine, but the thought that his sweet mate might be experiencing the same thing was leaving him very unsettled, and for the first time since the 3 of them started this thing, he found himself wanting to go home early. Jasper was startled out of his musings when Emmett's heavy frame settled in the grass beside him, followed a few seconds later by Rose sliding into his lap. It doesn't feel the same anymore, he said, as Rose nodded her agreement. Jasper tilted his head. Funny, I was thinking something similar. What changed for you? In the beginning, it was like I was trying to get back what was stolen from me, prove to myself that I was stronger than they were. And then, afterwards, I think I used it to get over all the inadequacies I felt being a part of the Cullens family, working out my frustrations, you know? Jasper nodded. He had used these trips as the same escape, considering it was one of the few times they'd been left to their own desires and not constantly monitored. And now, Emmett shrugged. It's different. I just don't have anything to fight against anymore. Everything's finally okay. He almost sounded bewildered by the prospect. Jasper chuckled. It feels a little weird, doesn't it? What it does, Rose asked, lacing her fingers with Emmett's. Being happy. The 3 of them shared soft smiles as they each got lost in thoughts about the girl who had completed their little family unit. Why did we stay with the Cullens as long as we did? Emmett finally pondered out loud. A faint smile crossed Jasper's lips. Because I think deep down, we knew they'd eventually lead us to Bella. Bella slammed the door to her truck, her hand hovering teasingly over the ignition before dropping back down to her side. As tempted as she was to go to her vamp's house and curl up on Jasper's bed, It just wouldn't feel the same. He wasn't there with her. She poked lightly at the fuzzy gray bells dangling from her rearview mirror, the surprise gift Emmett had mentioned on her birthday, with a sad smile. Gone only a day, and she missed them all desperately. She rested her head on the steering wheel, inhaling deeply in hopes that it would keep the tears stinging her eyes at bay. Her ears twitched at the sounds of muffled arguing from the house, and as much as she wanted to see Renee storm out through the door, bags in hand, she knew it wasn't going to happen. The airlines were completely booked for Thanksgiving. She knew this because Renee had demanded Phil get them flight out immediately as she stormed up the stairs, and he had timidly told her it was impossible. And because the only motel in town was maybe 2 steps up from being considered a flea bag, there was no way she'd stay there either. She could probably find some nice accommodations in Port Angeles if she wanted, but that would either require a very uncomfortable ride with Charlie or a ridiculously expensive cab drive, neither of which probably appealed to Renee now. Renee had never really had a problem with throwing money around, but she did have a strange intolerance for public transportation. So the only real option was for Bella to leave instead, and as much as she wanted to, she couldn't do that to Charlie. "Is it bad?" she asked when she heard the soft sigh of air next to her. "She's in the shower now," Nan responded. "It's properly muffling her screams." Bella raised her head. "Not that I don't appreciate it, but you probably did more harm than good with that stunt." Nan's lips thinned out into a frown. "I only wish it had still been hot." Bella chuckled rustily. "Harsh." "No. What she said was harsh, James. I have never been more ashamed that that woman is actually my blood. I shouldn't be surprised. She has so much of her mother in her." She sighed and looked out the window. "Where did I go wrong?" she muttered softly to herself. "I tried to give Sandra everything I didn't have when I was younger. If only I'd known it would make her incredibly spoiled in the process. And that man she married," she spat. "That arrogant bastard only made it worse." She sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Chain. I shouldn't be unloading my burdens on you. Not after that." She reached out a hand and began threading it through the hair that had fallen out of Bella's braid. "I never told you this, but long before I got pregnant with Sandra, I used to imagine the little girl I would have. She was exactly like you, Jane." Any control Bella had over her tears was lost as they streamed down her face at Nan's softly spoken admission. She scooted over the bench seat and curled herself into Nan's embrace. A part of her had always secretly wished that Renee had been more like Nan as well. "Are you going to call them?" Bella sniffled against her neck and shook her head. "They'll be home in no time, remember? I don't want to bother them." Nan chuckled. "I know for a fact that they would never consider you a bother." Bella shrugged as she shifted away and pocketed the keys. "Where are you going?" Nada asked as Bella wrapped her hand around the door handle. "Inside," Bella answered dully, popping the door open and sliding from the truck. She walked up the steps at half the speed she went down them, hesitating briefly when her hand curled around the knob before finally opening the door. Charlie was standing in the kitchen entranceway when she entered the house, his face blank, but his eyes sad. She turned away from the sight and made a beeline for the stairs, keeping her eyes downcast and her steps light as she went up them. Her gaze shifted away from Charlie's door as she walked by it, concerned that if she looked in its direction, it would somehow alert Renee, and the arguing on the other side of it would stop and be directed at her instead. As she walked in her bedroom and closed the door behind her, Bella was grateful that, thanks to their lack of a guest room, Charlie had offered to give up his room for Renee and Phil to stay in. She absently made a note to get him something awesome for Christmas to say thanks. She grabbed her cell phone off her dresser as she passed it and slumped down onto her unmade bed. "Come home now," her mind screamed, while all her eyes did was simply stare at the phone held limply in her hands. "Why are we arguing about this?" Emmett asked as the 3 of them walked at a human pace towards the cabin. "Who's arguing? I thought we were having a calm discussion," Rose grinned. "I don't think a calm discussion involves me being called a dipshit," Jasper commented dryly. "Just telling it like it is," Emmett retorted as he shrugged. "So tell me again why we're not heading back ASAP." Jasper began kicking at a rock with the square toe of his boot. "Bella wanted us to take this trip, and she needs time with her parents. This is a family holiday, you know?" "We're her family," Emmett grumbled petulantly. "Yeah, and we see her every day. She hasn't seen her mother since she moved here." "You mean the mother she barely gets along with?" Rose pointed out. "It doesn't change the fact that it's still her mother." "No," Emmett agreed. "But the fact that she tends to rub Bella the wrong way is exactly why we should be there. You've seen the look she gets on her face when she talks about her. I don't... Jasper hit the ground, clutching at his chest. What is it? Rose cried. I felt her, Jasper grunted. From this far away? Emmett exclaimed the same time Rose asked. Is Bella okay? She's not hurt, not physically at least, but her emotional distress is intense right now. Rose crouched down next to him and put her hand on his shoulder. Did you feel this earlier? Jasper shook his hand, getting to his feet shakily. Not exactly. I felt a twinge of something before, but when I focused on it, it disappeared. Why didn't you say something? Rose huffed. I wasn't sure what it was, he admitted. I thought it had to do with being separated. I felt that twinge all day. I didn't think it was possible to feel her emotions from this far away. And you're basing this theory on what exactly? Emmett and I have never been any significant distance away from each other in all the years we've been together. So who's to say the bond doesn't stretch that far? She smirked when she finished talking. What? Nothing. It's just amusing to see Mr. Prepared Soldier so in the dark about something. Her face grew serious. You're sure she's not hurt? He shook his head again. Remember when Bella tripped in our kitchen last month and banged her head? I felt the pain from that. It was different from any emotional pain I've felt from her. In fact, there was a brief throb of pain in my own head. He rubbed at his head in the same place he'd felt the phantom pain. That kind of connection, and you assumed what you felt was simply from the separation? How the hell did you explain the throbbing in your head to yourself? Sympathy pains, Jasper suggested sheepishly. Since we were in close proximity, I thought was my gift, that I was just feeling her pain. Well, what are you feeling right now? Honestly, I feel like crying. Did you learn nothing during all those discussions we had about mating bonds? We had those discussions when I was with Alice and trying to understand why we didn't feel like that. He felt a sliver of irritation from Rose when he mentioned Alice's name in reference to mating bonds. And you're a vampire. It's not like you forgot. I didn't forget. It's different when you're actually experiencing them instead of talking about it. Her face softened with understanding. Emmett shifted his large frame from side to side. I'm enjoying the mating bonds 101 lessons. Really I am. But Bells is apparently in some sort of pain right now, and I really think we should be focusing on that instead. Should I call her? Rose asked, as the cabin came in sight. Jasper looked up at the sky. Judging from the position of the sun, it was around 4 in the afternoon, give or take an hour. If we run, really run, they'd only pushed it a little more than half their speed on the way to the cabin. We can be there by sundown. Emmett rolled his eyes. Which is what we should have done in the first place. He paused. Dipshit. Our things? Rose questioned, looking over at the cabin. Anything important? She shook her head. Then forget it. They'll still be here when we come back. Agreed, Emmett replied, before taking off in the direction of Forks, kicking up a cloud of dust as he went. Last one to Forks has to drink skunk's blood, he called over his shoulder. Rose rolled her eyes and darted after him, Jasper hot on her trail. Hold on, darling. We're coming, he thought as he kicked his speed up a notch. Not only because he was eager to get back to her, but he'd be damned if he had to drink skunk's blood. Again, they had stopped at the house first, so Jasper could pick up his truck. He never went to Bella's house without it, when he knew Charlie was there and Emmett and Rose had chosen to stay behind and wait for him and Bella to come back. Charlie looked and felt frazzled when he opened the door, and Jasper felt his apprehension kick up another notch. Jasper! He exclaimed, equal parts confusion and relief reflected in his voice and emotions. What are you doing here? We decided to come back early. Didn't you just leave yesterday? He asked as he ushered him through the door. Jasper shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, he said, his eyes downcast. He knew for a fact that Bella hadn't specifically told Charlie where they were going, simply saying a cabin they had up north, but suspected that Charlie knew it was far enough away that they would have had to leave as soon as they got there to get back in the time frame that they had. Charlie was silent for a long moment, his face and emotions going blank. He wondered if that's where Bella got that particular skill from, and Jasper wondered if a warning siren was going off in his head screaming, overly attached boyfriend. He could already envision the restraining order Charlie would slap him with. He was relieved when his emotions shifted into gratefulness instead. Well, thank God you're here. Bella refuses to come out of her bedroom. She's been holed up in there for the last 2 hours. Jasper looked up the stairs. Oh, why did I leave you, darling? He turned back to Charlie. What happened? His face darkened. Renee's mouth is what happened. He ran a hand through his already mussed hair and chuckled bitterly. I can't believe I used to like that she spoke her mind. He shook his head in disgust. Maybe now that you're here, he leaned against the banister and shouted, Bella, Jasper's here. Jasper cocked his head. Other than the sound of the TV from the direction of Charlie's bedroom, he couldn't hear anything. No movement from Bella's room to signal that she had even heard Charlie. Maybe I should just... He pointed upstairs. Charlie nodded. Do that, he agreed before rolling up the sleeves of his shirt. I got a kitchen I need to finish cleaning. Jasper's desire to go to Bella battled with his urge to ask Charlie for more details, especially when he muttered, should have cleaned that gravy off the floor before it congealed. His first thought was food fight, but that seemed more like something that Emmett would instigate. Still, shades of a smile tickled his lips at the visuals as he climbed the stairs. It disappeared as he neared Bella's closed door and felt the waves of loneliness and sadness pulsing from the other side. He could also pick up the faint notes of music and determined she had her iPod on. That explains why she didn't hear Charlie. He didn't even bother knocking on the door, just mentally wrapped his hands around the cord that tied them together and gave a tug. He heard her gasp, then a loud thunk followed by a brief flash of pain before the door was flung open. Jasper, she cried, throwing herself in his arms and wrapping her legs and arms tightly around him. As he clutched her to him, he wondered if she was even aware she was mumbling. Never leave again, into the fabric of his sweater. Bella tightened the pillow over her head, ignoring Charlie's fourth attempt at knocking at her bedroom door. He finally got the message that, like last time and the time before, she wasn't going to answer, and she heard his footsteps shuffle away from the door and creak down the steps. Renee had gone silent an hour again and was no doubt glaring at the TV that Bella could hear blaring through the thin walls. Setting her iPod to shuffle, Bella stuck the earbuds in her ears to drown out any further attempt to get her attention. She knew she was being childish, but she figured she had more than earned the right to. She shut her eyes when Nan's sad gaze from the corner became too much and shifted so her back was to her. She appreciated her words in the truck, but right now she just wanted to wallow. She must have dozed off because when she woke, Nan was gone, and instead of the raspy lyrics of Piece of My Heart she'd been listening to earlier, Axl Rose was wailing in her ear. Oh, sweet child of mine. Every part of her ached as she stretched, catching the sight of one of her Nightmare Before Christmas-themed knee socks tied to the bedpost at her feet. Not a sign of I'm out for a walk that didn't require leaving a note that someone other than Bella might stumble on. Leaning up on her hands, she considered going out to look for her, if only to have a reason to get out of the house, and was so focused on the thought that at first, she didn't notice the throbbing in her chest was quickly being replaced by a pleasant hum. She certainly noticed a few seconds later, when it flared with an almost euphoric tugging sensation, and she gasped loudly and ended up toppling over the edge of the bed. She banged her funny bone heavily on the floor, but was saved from anything more than a twinge thanks to the carpet that cushioned her fall. Looking at the door through the messy curtain of her hair, and feeling every nerve in her body literally vibrating with awareness, she instinctively knew Jasper was on the other side. Scrambling to her feet, ripping the earbuds out as she went, she stumbled for the door and practically tore it off its hinges as she swung it open. Her jumbled mind only registered a flash of gold before she fell into his arms, clinging to him like a child would their mother. She tightened her grip as he walked them towards the bed, only loosening her legs enough to allow him to sit down. She gulped in a few shuddery inhalations of his scent as she felt all the stress from the last day melt out of her with a soft sigh. She purred as he ran his hands through her hair, his fingers gently working out the snarls. "What are you doing here?" "You needed me," he replied simply. She pulled back and stroked her thumb over his cool cheekbone. "You felt that?" she asked softly. He nuzzled into her hand. Don't ask me how, though. Jasper had told her before that this bond was a new experience for them both, and he might not be able to answer all of her questions. She kissed his lips. "I don't really care how," she whispered against them. "I'm just glad that you're here." She frowned lightly. "Is it always going to be like that when we separate?" she wondered as she fingered the fabric covering his chest. His hand rose to lay over hers. "Let's never find out again." She smiled. "Deal," and let him pull her into another languid kiss. A throat suddenly cleared from behind her, and Bella broke away, not even bothering to hide the scowl from the figure hovering at her open door. "Who is this, Bella?" Renee asked, and Bella could note a touch of incredulity in her voice, no doubt assuming she had been lying about the boyfriend thing. Jasper brushed her cheek and shifted her off of him, so he could stand and take a slightly protective stance in front of her. From around him, Bella could see Renee's eyes widen in awe, already suckered completely in by what her vamps called the vampire glamour, or as Emmett insisted on referring to it as the vlammer. "And you are," Renee repeated huskily, smoothing a hand down her silk pajamas. "Jasper," he shot a questioning look over his shoulder at Bella, and she mouthed the last name she'd given Renee. "Hail." He didn't ask for her name in return, but Renee took it upon herself to offer it anyways. "Renee Higginbotham," she said, lifting her hand up, palm down, as if she expected him to kiss it. Bella's mouth dropped open. She did not just introduce herself by her maiden name. Her mother was flirting with her mate. Wasn't that just the icing on the freaking cake? Where was Nain when you needed Den to throw something? She smirked when Jasper simply looked at her hand, long enough for the moment to become sufficiently uncomfortable, before Renee dropped it back to her side with a nervous giggle. "I'm Bella's—" "I know who you are," he interrupted tightly, then completely dismissed her by offering his back as he turned around to face Bella again. "Why don't you get your stuff together, Dallin? You can spend the rest of the weekend at my place." "Now wait just a damn minute." "Good idea, Jasper." Bella saw Charlie come up behind Renee as she got to her feet. "Go ahead, Bella. I'll call you after." He didn't finish the sentence, but the "after Renee leaves" was clearly implied. "You're welcome to come, Charlie," Jasper said gamely as Renee squawked in outrage. "There's more than enough room." Charlie chuckled, ignoring the glare being directed at him. "Don't tempt me, son. God knows what I'd come back to if I did." Renee stomped her bare foot loudly, marching back to the room she'd vacated and pushing aside a questioning Phil who was timidly peeking outside the door. The pictures on the wall shook as she slammed it in her. Bella slipped her feet into her canvas sneakers and, as she passed Charlie, gave him an impulsive hug. "Thanks, Dad," he muttered out, an unintelligible reply, and patted her on the back. "Sleep in my room, okay?" she said as she pulled away. "Renee might try to suffocate you in your sleep after this." He barked out a laugh and began pushing her towards the stairs. "Get out of here, kid. You're sure you're okay with this?" Bella asked, wringing her hands as Charlie followed her and Jasper down the stairs. "Why wouldn't I be?" Charlie replied casually. "I know this was supposed to be our family time." She pushed away the urge to make her fingers do little quote marks in the air as she said it. Charlie smirked. "I think we can agree we've both had enough family time for the day. Go enjoy the rest of the weekend," he pointed a finger at Jasper. "But Christmas is mine." He chuckled and held a hand out for Charlie to shake. "Deal." Pulling her jacket on, she offered Charlie a wave and a small grin and left the house for the second time that day, wrapped safely in the arms of her mate's embrace. At least this night ended on a high note, she decided as she climbed in Jasper's truck. She looked back at the house as he pulled out of the driveway and finally found a reason to offer thanks. "Thanks for coming back." Jasper wrapped his arm around her and pulled her to his side. "Always." They were all sprawled out on the floor of the living room in front of the ceiling two-floor window, the couch pushed slightly back to give them the space to spread out. Bella leaned back against Jasper. Emmett lay beside her, his head resting on her upper thigh, and Rose was lying against him, her chin propped up on his stomach. Earlier in the evening, hugs had been given, tears had been shed, on Bella's part at least. Renee's name had been cursed, and I love yous had been freely shared. Now the four of them silently watched the first snow fall through the lightly frosted glass, admiring the beauty of it as each of them recuperated from the emotional drain from the day and simply enjoyed the closeness. "Next Thanksgiving we're all going to Disneyland," Emmett declared suddenly. "Agreed," they replied unanimously.